have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the coffee to my cherry pie.
Finally, Kalil acknowledges me as damn fine on the podcast. Me as the Unplugged Professor. I'm going to say it before I forget it.
Lukewarm, sitting on the counter, garbage coffee, too much creamer, too much sugar, saccharinely
Excuse
sweet.
me, I don't taint my coffee. I have it black as midnight on a moonless night.
More
every
like
time.
white on a sunny beach.
Just milk with
Sand.
a drop.
It's sandy.
Sandy, like straight up drinking the grains. Delicious.
Today's grainy episode of the Twin Peaks Logcast is covering parts 17 and 18 of The Return. Part 17, known as The Past Dictates the Future, and Part 18, known as What is Your Name?
We've made it, Kalil. We made it to the end of The Return. So how do you feel now that we are approaching this final point of The Return for us? Like this
I mean, we have more than approaching. We are on that sandy beach right now.
Yes.
I feel a lot of emotions. Anyone who's been following this up to this point knows that I have experienced negative feelings toward The Return.
You don't say.
When I first watched it years ago, I was disappointed by it, but I thought that maybe when I go back to it, those feelings might change.
Mm-hmm.
But after hours of discussing it with people between my first and second viewing, and now hours of on the podcast discussing this with you, Professor, and off pod, I dislike The Return more than I ever have, and it's something I have to wrestle with, knowing that that does not speak for the majority of Twin Peaks fans. I'm kind of in an outlier position, and I hope that for those who do share similar disagreements with The Return, who also are not huge fans of it, I hope that I've been able to speak justice to maybe some of your opinions that we share. And for those who love The Return, I hope I've been able to provide another viewpoint, another perspective that even though we may not agree, I hope at least I've opened some eyes to why someone might not like The Return. Now that I am done, I am simultaneously glad it's over, but then also having to deal with the fact that I'm glad it's over. It's a weird contradictory feeling. I will say, first and foremost, Part 17 is my least favorite part in all of Twin Peaks. It's my least favorite episode, part, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Part 18, I don't really have a lot of beef with. I think Part 18, as a vegetarian, I don't have a lot of beef with it especially, but I feel like Part 18, the problems I would maybe go against with it aren't the fault of the episode itself. It's more that the episode is so disjointed from everything that maybe as an ending, it doesn't feel quote-unquote set up. But that's not the fault of the episode's pacing or the episode's execution. It's more that it is this outlier thing that doesn't connect. Part 17 is where most of my upset feelings would come from. That's where I think it's the culmination of Mr. C's plotline, Dale Cooper's to a large extent,
Yes.
Freddy's. A lot of things that I can have issue with are really in 17, not 18. I would also say Part 18 is the turning point where, although I'm okay with the episode, I would say that it cements for me the status that The Return might be the most confusing thing David Lynch has ever made. Maybe blatantly so, maybe purposefully so, to the extent that it feels to me like a puzzle box without a solution or a maze with no exit. I would say that, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive are confusing, but you can still summarize them. If I say Lost Highway, a man kills his wife and experiences the aftermath of that.
Yes.
If I say that Mulholland Drive, a young actress goes to Hollywood and experiences a nightmare, and even Inland Empire, if I say a woman in trouble starts to lose her sense of reality, I could summarize it that way. In the original Twin Peaks, even though it's a long show, I can give basic ideas of what the premise of Twin Peaks is about. With The Return, I still struggle to this day, to this very moment, to understand what main characters were doing. What was the goal of Dale Cooper? What was the goal of Mr. C? What was the goal of key agents like Philip Jeffries or Major Briggs of the Firemen? And that lack of understanding, lack of context, makes it the thing that I look at with the most bewildering feelings in face of it.
The most I can say about Twin Peaks The Return, if I had to sum up into a short note, would be the people who live inside of the dream have the potential doom of an all-consuming nightmare lurking in the background. I say this also looking into both Part 17 and Part 18. Part 17 is one of those cases where I acknowledge how much I do adore The Return, where the cinematography as well as the style of the show itself, I can see weaknesses in the script. I can see and acknowledge the weaknesses that come forward to the point that I can look you straight in the eyes and say, yeah, no, these are cases in which I do believe deserve scrutiny, but at the same time, even for how many times it kicks me out of the experience, it puts me into a new box that I kind of look into it, and I'm surprised how much I do enjoy it.
A glass box?
A glass box. Yeah, no, genuinely transparent, genuinely acknowledging my surroundings and being knocked out of it, but also kind of looking into the marvel of what it is, and
as opposed to the DC of what it is.
Exactly. And enjoying my surroundings, like the look of The Return from the moments inside of the black and white, potentially mauve zone, where we have Major Briggs's head floating off into the distance, to the fun ball that we get to fight with a green glove. I acknowledge that it isn't something that is going to keep me immersed and keep my mind in the media like a great illusionist, but instead, like its own strange art style, I'm appreciating the weird work of it and very fond of it.
So to clarify, you would still at this point say that the original Twin Peaks series and Fire Walk with Me are stronger.
Yes. I think
in terms of the writing, in terms of maybe the consistency of execution.
Yes.
But you prefer The Return.
I prefer The Return, but I think the best way I can describe it is both Fire Walk with Me as well as Twin Peaks, they still have their flaws, but for the most part, they are very well-crafted bowls. They are things that have went through their hard works and craftsmanship, have their unique shapes, and would go great in anyone's cabinets. In this case, I take The Return and see the cracks, but the cracks are lined with gold, similar to a type of pottery in which all those broken pieces are molded into this new shape. You acknowledge the cracks, you look at the cracks, you know that this bowl was once broken, but I almost find a magic in the flaw, to the point that I think that the gold lining works for my glance and interpretation of the work.
So what you're saying is that Twin Peaks The Return made you finally crack.
Proudly so. And I think with Part 18, before I went into my second viewing, you and I had a discussion off pod, and I looked at first at it potentially being David Lynch trying to make the perfect goose egg in this case, of showing like many answers laid out and spoken clearly to an audience and leaving an overarching mystery towards the end as something not to be unlocked. But I do look at my second viewing, and I do genuinely think I understand. I think I do understand at the very least, the core mysteries and the core ideas, using things such as a Lil Codex referencing Fire Walk with Me, which I will say comes to be important in the reading of Part 18.
You heard it here first, folks, that the 4-hour video analysis, Twin Peaks Explained Professor Edition, is going to come soon.
No, it is not.
It's actually going to come sooner than you may realize.
It's literally going to be in the spot.
We're going to sandwich a conversation about the middle between Part 17 and Part 18. We're going to talk about Judy.
We're going to talk about Judy in the middle of this.
A lot of this you have not told me, Professor.
Yes.
I do not know the full extent of what you're going to say. I am very interested.
I'm glad you're interested, because I think that your readings are fair. I think that you'll probably still hold well to your feelings, but I hope you can understand at the very least what I'm grasping at on this reading, because I do feel content with it. I feel at peace with it.
Good. I feel the opposite of peace at this moment. I'm curious then, just kind of in the broad strokes of it, how do you feel about parts 17 and 18 as the end to Twin Peaks The Return, or the just end to Twin Peaks? What do you feel like generally about those things?
It's great. Genuinely, it's great. It's something where I was very surprised when I heard comments that you had mentioned that, expectations of another season are going beyond. I think that it is a good, bad ending closure to the entirety of Twin Peaks, where we did have our sweet and fulfilled ending, but going even further in, thanks to Dale Cooper's flaws, we do end in something a bit more darker. And I do think balancing in that sense of goodness with that darkness is something that is very strong whenever it comes to Twin Peaks. I think it's a piece of media that almost needs those odds and ends of the uplifting and the horrifying.
And to clarify what I think you meant by the idea of possible hopes for another season is that I remember when the ending for parts 18 and 17 came out, there were a fairly large number of people, fairly large number of viewers who expressed feelings online. I mainly speak I mainly speak about the subreddit at that point, but people wanting there to be a season 4 because they wanted more context, they wanted more answers, they wanted David Lynch to have more, whether it's more with Carrie Page or Richard and Linda or going through this like alternate timeline or anything like that. And there was a fair amount of it, and I think there's still some interest of fans wanting another season. And I remember just looking at that and just being baffled because it's one thing to want more of Twin Peaks. If you liked The Return and you think David Lynch has more things to do with the intellectual property of Twin Peaks in some way, I could see you wanting more of this if you think there's a story to tell. But to expect answers out of it, to expect understanding and context, I feel like David Lynch and Mark Frost had all of the power and control to tell the story they wanted to tell completely. And if David Lynch had felt like he wanted to explain things more, I think he would have.
Maybe not. I think that even if, like, we could have the ideal, oh, you don't just get, like, 9 hours, you get 18 hours, not just 18, you get 27. Even if we extend, I think that there still is something nice about something to chew on, such as The Return.
Yeah,
And genuinely, it's still, like, even if it remains as my favorite piece, even though I do love Twin Peaks, I think I'm very satisfied with, like, how we've come to the end now.
Sure. I mean, I am operating under the belief that Twin Peaks: The Return is like unprecedented amounts of a single person or two people having control over a television series.
Okay.
Like, I'm believing that Showtime gave David Lynch and Mark Frost more control over this than the original show ever had at any point, maybe other than the pilot itself.
Yeah.
So I'm going into the assumption that, yeah, David Lynch and Mark Frost, they got what they wanted out of this series. I think at least Mark Frost has said things to that extent. So I think that, again, if there were answers, we would have got them. I do then want to pose the question to you that the final dossier is after this. You know that there is a shorter book that follows release-wise after The Return. What do you think that would be? And I know you don't know. I know you're not huge into theory crafting, but if you feel like this was a complete ending for Twin Peaks, even more than maybe season 2's ending, more than Fire Walk with Me, this ended Twin Peaks for you.
Yeah.
What do you think there is to tell in another book?
If we are to recognize this as the dream, I think using a source material that David Lynch is fond of, The Wizard of Oz, I think it's something that the dream lives on even beyond the dreamer. It's something that the exploration of Oz without Dorothy is still possible because we have materials, even outside of personal authors, such as Wicked, such as The Great and Wonderful Oz. There are points to still explore in an ideal world of a dream without that dreamer. So that's what I'm expecting out of the dossier, if you will.
Interesting. Okay.
Just because I do have strong feelings on, like, the dreamer at the moment.
Are there any things that you would want in that experience?
No.
Okay.
Genuinely, no. I think that whatever it ends up giving forward, one thing that I suppose look forward to is an interesting statement, but I look forward to seeing what they're going to do with Tammy Preston.
Okay.
Seeing as the tones of Tammy Preston in the show as opposed to the book are two separate entities, in my personal opinion.
And you already know going in that Tammy is involved in this book.
Yep.
Even from your cursory glances at it.
From my cursory glances on the back flap of the page, it's literally signed Tammy Preston.
There you go. So let's dive into part 17.
Not Tim Pinkle.
Not Tim Pinkle. Diving into part 17, we have this section kind of at the beginning with the FBI where Gordon Cole reveals that for 25 years he's been keeping a secret from Albert. I don't know if you'd say it's as big of a secret, or maybe it's bigger, maybe it's the same as the secret that Albert had been keeping from Gordon Cole earlier.
Yes.
But now we find out that Gordon Cole had not told Albert, and not told, obviously, the audience then, that he and Dale Cooper, in the past, 25 years ago, around then, had talked with Major Briggs about the discovery of an entity named Jowday. Now, I'm going to assume, timeline-wise, this probably was around the time where Gordon Cole was visiting Twin Peaks, like probably during Season 2, and it happened off-screen in the continuity of Season 2. So before the ending of Season 2, very importantly.
Yes, and I do think that at the very least, him revealing this to Tammy as well as Albert is notable because of how Albert withheld information and shared it with Gordon Cole. As a reading externally, you can try to like put whatever pressures you have on the characters from what were revealed on cohesive secrets held up from each other.
Now, obviously, we're going to talk about Judy later. I think it's interesting, though, even outside of Judy herself, or itself, is this sense of how important Major Briggs has become outside of the original show, that between Mark Frost's book with the dossier obviously having the archivist, or one of the archivists being him, but then also what kind of mythologizing has happened where he has become this like supernatural avatar reaching between humanity and the mob zone. He's like clearly at this point elevated to the status of like key player in the grand scheme of things. And given everything we know about Major Briggs from the show and from the return and from everything, probably a force for good, at least what he considers good, his best intentions. The dude has a pretty good track record.
And I'd say that it's a logical conclusion to the character, in my personal interpretation, from what we've seen in the original show on how he does balance that means of the mythological, like spiritual end, as well as the seriousness and belief in his work job, as well as his duties. I think that transferring him into this role and how much more importance the secret history pins on things such as history and the much larger scope of the mythical ideas inside Twin Peaks, that it makes sense on where we put Major Briggs.
I have mixed feelings about it. I guess my thinking also comes into the way in which it feels like Major Briggs has become a plot device. Obviously, unfortunately, the actor was not able to recur his role because he had passed away, but there is this sense in which he has been reduced to a floating head in a couple scenes, and then this off-screen actor who basically is there to fill in the blanks of some of the plot and just be kind of shoehorned into situations. And it also feels a little bit weird to me, although I think there's good arguments against it. It does seem weird to me that we don't hear about Zhao Day in the Secret History of Twin Peaks, because if this was some big setup for a mission or something that seems important with Major Briggs, it was a big important thing, it's weird that it doesn't get brought up to my memory once. I don't think it's brought up in the Secret History at all, even bringing up the idea of Zhao Day. We get things that may be associated with the black magic, the Aleister Crowley sections. Maybe there's something there, but it's never specific, and it feels like it's not being set up right. Like, I feel like there was an opportunity to set this up better in the book and then pay it off in the return. Not that you would ever need to read the book, but it would be beneficial. Like, if you read the book, it'd be like, oh, cool, that's there.
Yes.
But it just feels like they're disconnected. It feels like the Major Briggs of the Secret History isn't quite fitting in with the one of the return. And it's also, personally, a little tragic and sad to see one of the characters I really liked, again, feeling a bit like a shoehorned plot device. Not like I have a better answer at the moment.
Yeah.
But I miss the personality of him, and right now he's just there to be a force.
I think that him becoming a force kind of still contextualizes the ideas of forces inside the Red Room mob zone that we've seen. If I may say, the Laura Palmer of the Red Room seems different than the Laura Palmer we've gotten to know through the books, as well as the other bits of material still, but Laura Palmer's presence carries a weight. I think that even though we don't see a lot with Major Briggs doing some, as I've mentioned before, a little bit heavy lifting through here, Major Briggs is the type of person that could have easily found peace and ascension away from his line of works, but instead has dedicated to his work to a point that he works in this intermittent zone to try to help out beyond. It's something that he is now a guiding force amongst them. And though, yes, of course, I'd love to see more performance, but as we've mentioned, he is someone who's passed away, but also this fate for him, what does that say for Larch of the character? I find it fascinating.
He ceased to be a man dealing with doubts and regrets and concerns about his placement in the military and with the government, but then also his doubts about his ability to raise his son. And now he's become an omniscient tool for the story, in the sense that he just he like predicts everything. He knows everything. He knows this person, and this person's going to be at this place here and there. And again, it's a change in the character that I understand, but I can't say I'm entirely thrilled about it, because when I think of Major Briggs, I'm going to be thinking about the man who is grappling with these secrets behind the scenes, unsure about his own conscience, that he has to give this information over to a government that he knows has been sabotaging in the past. Given, like, this is where I think the Secret History of Twin Peaks aligns better with Major Briggs for me, because when we hear about the archivist, we get his thoughts, we get his feelings. He feels like someone who has to weigh things. And in the return, he is a wiki. He is a resource. He's a magic 8-ball.
He is someone that actively, for one, cannot speak, so we can't even get more dialogue.
He does say blue rose.
He does say blue rose. But he is still someone of a silent guiding force, and I do think that can hinder things for a character for some people. For me, I see it as similar to his very silent sitting inside of the chair, inside of that mythical oasis, if you will.
Sure.
So I'm already familiar with it. I see that the shifts with Laura Palmer, this sense of ascension has changed him.
Well, and then also part of it is that, and not to belabor this point, but
Yes.
I don't feel like it's a happy ending for Major Briggs, at least emotionally. Maybe
No.
it's supposed to be, but I see him as this neutral-faced, stone-faced, disembodied head floating throughout, repeating Blue Rose, and just kind of staring off in the distance, as opposed to the image he gave Bobby of being in a vast veranda, vast estate, everything being beautiful with his son. I don't see that here. I see him as being completely separated from his humanity.
I think that he is separated from his humanity, but if we do recall the events, and if we are to believe the final notes inside of the secret history, Mr. C very likely got involved with Major Briggs, and maybe those opportunities were ripped away by this very malevolent force for suffering. It's something that I don't think that this is a happy ending. I don't think this is a happy instance, and I think Major Briggs could probably put up a laundry list of other vacation options other than the potential MOV zone for what's happening to him right now. But it still is a reality that maybe he is cursed for his line of work from this point on. But I still think that can be compelling to a point.
Sure, and it doesn't have to be a happy ending for him. I would just say this is where my mixed feelings come in. And when I think of Major Briggs, I think of a different form of Major Briggs than this version in The Return.
Yes.
That's how I guess I choose to remember the character. Maybe I'll say it that way. Other things in the FBI office, I think it's notable the wording here with Gordon Cole that, he wasn't able to shoot Diane's tulpa. He wasn't willing to. And Albert responds that you've gone soft, to which Gordon Cole says, not where it counts, old buddy, which I'm going to assume means his penis.
It's something hard to say because...
It's something hard, all right, according to Gordon Cole.
Because, it's read off in a delivery that sounds like he's trying to say something more heartfelt.
Oh, I take it as, not where it counts. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's how I read it.
But I do think that his sort of, gasped air sigh would communicate something more sentimental, but going soft is in that sentimentality. So I do think, it's a weird point where,
I don't know what he was going for.
I don't know what you're going for, and I think it's a weakness because the nicest way that I could put it is that David Lynch is much better of a director than he is an actor.
From the line read, my first time watching it and repeated viewings, I still do take it as him saying that he can still, intercourse properly.
I've got my penis.
And
maybe there's something weirdly nuanced, but I don't think it's delivered in a fashion that I'm convinced
Well,
otherwise.
what I was going to say, though, is that from a meta angle, though, I think what I've always interpreted that is don't worry, I could still screw with you, to the viewers. I've taken it as the director saying, you may think I've gotten old. You may think no. You don't know what I'm going to do. You don't know what 17 and 18.
You don't know what I'm capable
Especially
of.
18.
You think I'm just full of sweetness? No.
I'm going to screw with your mind. Don't worry, I can endure. So I honestly have read it that way.
Honestly, I prefer that reading. I prefer that reading over penis reading.
Which is kind of an acknowledgement of yeah, I'm going to do this to you.
I'll take Troll David Lynch over penis David Lynch.
Well, maybe they're both. One and the same.
One and the same.
I also don't get that they suddenly toast to the Bureau. Again, I'm thinking in real time, just a few minutes ago they shot Diane's tulpa, and the mood has been, wow, that's a real tulpa, so they do exist. Huh, what's going on over at the police station? Man, I wish I could have shot her. Toast!
No, I think that since they poured themselves some wine, alcohol being served after an instance like that is kind of like focusing, settling one's nerves. When it comes down to cheers to the Bureau, it's recognizing the duty above all else, their job above all else. It's something that reads off as something that they just recognize the importance of their work over any sort of sentimentality. Okay. And I think that the dialogue read from Albert is notable of that as well.
Fair. It just feels, again, tone deaf of the emotional weight of shooting Diane's tulpa and hearing that Mr. C had assaulted and took advantage of Diane all those years ago. It's completely undercut by non sequitur plot detail stories and all of a sudden cheering. It just feels like the heaviness of the mood is not being allowed to actually be recognized.
And I think that would be okay for Albert as well as Tammy Preston if that was delivered through. I just wish I saw more from Gordon Cole for, like, the conflict of it.
I would have wanted more from Albert as well. I mean, Tammy's just there. Tammy's just sitting there, and I'll say more in a moment, but I don't know if I can expect her to have a reaction as much other than just respecting maybe how they feel, because she didn't really know Diane.
Yes.
She hasn't had a relationship with her this entire season.
Yes.
If you count The Return as a season. Whatever it is, a show, whatever.
Yes, but we've also seen Albert, as well as his explanation going forward, that his coldness also comes from a place of love. His sense of duty comes from a place of love.
Maybe.
So that's where having that point of Albert, I think, makes sense for the character logically, just because diving into the other hole seems to be more of a field that would spin off well with someone such as Dale Cooper. But I do think that the perfect person to break for this instance would have been Gordon
I just
Cole.
think the emotional impact of this scene is not allowed to linger or resonate because of the fact that the story has to keep moving. And this is where, no matter what you think is going on with Jowday, I feel that the explanation Gordon Cole gives at the beginning of part 17 feels so blunt and so dryly mishandled. Like, for my feelings, it really takes me out of the emotion and out of the scene and almost becomes laughable.
Okay.
That Gordon Cole has to almost look the camera in the eye and explain Judy to us. And it's just, it doesn't feel right at all for either in-universe, for the character to do this, but then also out-universe. It feels very plot contrivance.
It's something that is taken out of the back pocket, if you will, to start taking notes down, because it's only now in this instance of now leading in that you are given this note. And I think it's mostly because it wants to keep this note nice and fresh for you
but
as
there are
you're
ways
going
to
in.
communicate information that are more natural. This is where, like, it just feels, oh, we're at the 11th hour. I guess it's time for me to say this to you.
We had our time with Philip Jeffries that could have also kind of explored this through a sense of dialogue. And I do think that there were instances. I think that this is a bit flip-floppity on here. And that you saw me laugh a lot when this first came around.
You genuinely did. Now, your second time, did you find it still as funny?
I was trying to pay more attention to it because now knowing that it's extreme negative force called Jowday, it is something that is something that I'm chewing on and something that I'm able to take in, but it very much comes off in that sense of like, I'm putting this down, I'm jotting this down.
It's the delivery style, regardless of what the information implies.
Yes.
It's the way it's communicated I don't quite like.
Yes.
Do you like it?
No, I don't like it.
Okay.
I genuinely don't like it. It's in that same vein of As You All Know.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
it's a case that it's like, but
as
I've
you
kept
don't
it from
know,
you.
As you
don't know.
Yeah, it is delivered very, very dryly like that. And again, part of it's the performance, but I think even it's in the script too. Like, if you gave that exact same information to a different character who's like, let's say, a very good actor, could they still deliver it in a way that feels natural?
I think so. I think that, like, if you do it in a sense that carrying on the emotion of what just happened and have that sort of like breaking point sort of like hit through, that's when, like, it feels like putting down those defenses after seeing that person disappear and realizing maybe I should put everything on the table.
The way I would phrase
then it would be a better framing.
The way I would phrase it is that there are moments in Twin Peaks: The Return where I feel the script is underwritten or not evocative of what it maybe should be doing, in my opinion.
Okay.
But then the performance is elevated to make it work. This is one of those cases where I think the script was not written in the way I would have wanted, but the performance did not make it work.
Like I've said
before, I think it needed that pass.
I love David Lynch's work. I'm not in love with his acting.
I think an interesting line also is Gordon Cole saying that, you know, Dale Cooper told me if he ever disappeared like the others, like Philip Jeffries or like Chet Desmond, that if he disappeared, I should do everything in my power to find him. And I'm kind of just like, the more I linger on that comment and like take it seriously, I don't think the intention is what I'm about to say. I think we're meant to just like nod and smile and understand the importance of what's going on. But I'm like, wait a second. Like, taking a step back, did Gordon Cole do everything he could for 25 years to find Dale Cooper? There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know everything that happened with this past 25 years. What I would say, though, is that if Albert's the only other task force member, and Albert didn't know this until now, presumably Gordon Cole didn't have anyone else he could tell, because who would he tell if he didn't tell Albert? No one seems to be more trusted. So no one else knew but Gordon Cole this information, presumably. Major Briggs and Philip Jeffries aren't active in the real Earth world right now.
Yes.
I don't have any evidence that Gordon Cole has done anything to find Dale Cooper in the past 25 years.
And it's something I don't have evidence for, to, or against. I just have to either trust him at his word or
do you trust Gordon Cole?
I never trust Gordon Cole, but it's one of those cases where I'm looking at him. It's like, now, did you study for the test, Gordon
it's
Cole?
being
It's
told
like,
as
of
the
course I
author.
did. I stayed up all night. It's like, okay, Gordon Cole.
It sounds like the author saying it, which
Yes.
is what I don't like about the writing. And again, Gordon Cole at some points isn't even a character. It's just a mouthpiece for David Lynch. And that is unfortunate. That is very unfortunate that happened. And the only thing I really say is that the assignment given to Tammy with the Mark Frost book, with the Secret History, that you could read that is his way of trying to find Cooper, because maybe the case that it's tied to was found at an active crime scene, which we still don't know from the return what that would have been, I don't think, right?
We do not, actually.
I would assume it's going to be the one with Ruth Davenport, because if the Major Briggs was met there, it's possible he gave the dossier, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To them, but it's never connected in a way that I find, again, maybe it should have been connected for some follow through. Anyway, maybe Gordon Cole's way of finding Dale Cooper was to give Tammy this mission that would lead to maybe finding him. But based on the way Gordon Cole seems surprised by everything in the return, it's like anytime like Dale Cooper's involved, Gordon Cole's like, Cooper? Huh. Like, it doesn't seem like he really knows that this is going to lead to Cooper. So I'm kind of just led to believe that Dale Cooper said, now, Gordon, if anything happens to me, like it did with Chet Desmond and Philip Jeffries, I want you to try to find me. Do whatever it takes to find me. You got it, Coop. And then when Dale Cooper disappeared, Gordon Cole just kind of sat on his hands for 25 years.
Yeah, it's one of those cases with maybe he's like, I want to do everything in your power to find me. He never like set up a time limit. You could argue that since they were looking out for someone like Tammy Preston for all this time to introduce to the Blue Rose Task Force, which, mind you, again, 25 years have passed. It's one of those cases where if it's like everything in my power was to just find like the perfect agent to bring along, you really need to do some more lifting with Tammy Preston at that point to make it seem like she is the one to make that weight lifted to make up for the 25 years, or elsewise the Secret History could be recognized as a last-second attempt, like the last day before the test.
Again, 25 years later, that already is close. That's like 2016 when the dossier happened, so it still doesn't help with the math. and I want to say that if this seems unfair for Gordon Cole, remember that Major Briggs is in the return as having that element where the military, there's that, I think it was a colonel, who literally has said, like, yeah, we've been getting these hits over the past few years. Yeah. They keep track of every time Major Briggs' prints have been found. There seems to be a semi-active investigation into what's going on with Major Briggs during this 25 years. So if you have a consistent plot line where a government official and their organization are doing some things to look into a disappearance of an official. Yeah. And then you have another one where they don't have any evidence. It kind of seems jarring. Like, it seems like if we wanted to communicate that there's been an ongoing investigation to find Dale Cooper, they've already shown how to show that with another case.
They've shown it with another case, which might show to, like, the leaning of Gordon Cole's failures and flaws, seeing as he's requested of this one thing, other people are able to handle this, but also maybe Cooper might have alluded to or spiritually felt in some fashion that a Mr. C may pop through and something needed to act against it. In which case, nothing act against Mr. C. Mr. C was too powerful, a raging tyrant, and had made connection that made everyone's lives miserable.
I understand that.
And maybe Gordon Cole just wasn't strong enough in that case. Maybe it just shows the weaknesses of Gordon Cole.
I understand that, you know, you're dealing with supernatural elements and Gordon Cole is limited. But when there's two people walking around who have the exact same physical appearance, and we know that Mr. C's fingerprints match, you're telling me there was no evidence of their existence for 25 years?
Mr. C is really good at wiping the prints away.
We know that Dougie wasn't around for exactly 25 because there's like some no evidence before a certain year kind of deal. Yeah. But it's like, I feel like if you were doing everything in your power in the FBI with the resources you have, and there's two people identical to him walking around, I don't think there would be nothing. I feel like you'd find something, and this is where, like, we have this discussion. I like this discussion. I think we're onto things. Yeah. If I'm thinking what was the intent of this scene, I don't believe in my heart of hearts that we're meant, quote unquote, to read this scene as the failures of Gordon Cole. I think it's supposed to be, like you said, here's some notes, take your information and go. Yes. I think we're meant to just say, oh yeah, okay, cool. Yes. Dale Cooper thought he might disappear. It's setting up, we got to do something about it. I don't think we're meant to read into the fact that implies Gordon Cole hasn't done anything to our knowledge. And if it was supposed to be set up, it wasn't.
It wasn't set up. It's something inside the background, which I do think that there's a fair amount in the return that it is is, and whether or not you consider Mr. C to be a Carmen Sandiego figure in which it's like a good agent turned bad and is able to figure out what exactly the agency would look for, and that's how they're able to hide under the radar, maybe, but still, nonetheless, it just continues to pile onto the flaw list of Gordon Cole, in which I'm just saying, like, Gordon Cole, how are you doing? Because it doesn't seem you're doing good from your track record right here. It's like, how dare you, Professor? I could have buried you in the ground years ago. You can't.
Thank you for bringing that back up. And just to kind of maybe TLDR summarize all this, because we've been going on for a long time about Gordon Cole. What this means to me...
Welcome to the Gordon Cole Logcast.
What this means to me, though, is that there is a disconnect between how the writing is for Gordon Cole.
Yes.
The on-surface messaging that he's this great guy, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But anytime we analyze it and look at him, he seems like someone who's manipulative, deceitful, and generally does not actually follow his word and does not actually show any evidence of effort. And he seems to be a womanizer. I almost have no positive traits. Like, actually, and I've kind of had to hold back a little bit because I wanted you to form your own opinion.
Yeah.
But you've independently formed your opinion that Gordon Cole's not reliable, not trustworthy.
Gordon Cole just sucks as a person.
But
and
is that how it's written? I don't think it's supposed to be.
I don't think it might be how it's written, but I don't think that David Lynch is beyond writing those things in a character either.
I wish it was, and if it maybe it's so obvious he's supposed to be written as a bad guy.
Yeah.
And we're big braining it, thinking we're small braining. I don't know what we're doing, but we're thinking for some reason that it's not intended when it actually is intended. I don't know. I'm getting mixed signals from the writing, and I think that that's a problem.
Okay.
And again, maybe it comes down to performance, maybe it comes down to script, both. Who knows? There's a reference in here that Raymond Rowe is an FBI informant. That's confirming that information. I don't have much to say beyond that. I've heard people say it doesn't have consistency because there are things that Ray doesn't know or does know that don't make sense, because if Ray is an FBI informant and he knows this and this and this, shouldn't Gordon Cole also know this and this and this? I've read some people theorizing, not enough that I can cite anyone right now, but I bet there's probably something to look into with that, because it does feel a bit disconnected. And again, take your notes. This fills in a blank.
Take your notes, fill in a blank. From what I've seen from Ray, I think that he's the type to play multiple sides, whether or not he is double agent, triple agenting. I think at the end of the day, Ray's looking out for himself.
And you have that unknown element of the person who said they were Philip Jeffries, but does not sound like Philip Jeffries early on in like part 2 or 3, talking to Mr. C.
Yes.
That has not been clarified.
No.
You can speculate that it's an FBI person.
Or the usage of electricity can alter a tone, voice, or something inside of 2 different realms.
But it doesn't even speak the same personality.
Yes.
Because from what I remember, the one in the voice seems a lot more certain they're against Mr. C, whereas Philip Jeffries is like, Cooper, is that you? And then just seems kind of confused and gives the information. Like, it's not 100% feeling like the same person.
I disagree in the respect that I do think that there are some dissonances. I don't think that they're far apart to try to make those connections, but I do give the tone of the first Philip Jeffries questioning to be like, if I were to see a human form of it, I can see the Philip Jeffries lighting a cigar, and that's scene itself from...
I just think it's not clear.
It isn't clear. It is not.
And how important that is to an individual viewer depends on what you think Raymond Rowe's importance is.
Yes.
I think we spent an awful lot of time with Raymond Rowe for this story to be like, he was an FBI informant. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the voice. Like, I don't know. It's again, not satisfying to me. At this point in juncture, with everything we've seen so far, can I now say Tammy is the worst character in Twin Peaks?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, genuinely, as far as, like, you can see characters that are on the screen far less. I can say that there are certain characters that kind of have a bad itch on me for what they're going for.
Like, you've mentioned Lucy's sister before Gwen.
Exactly.
In like one episode.
But I think that Gwen accomplishes her goal on what they intend with the
She's meant to be
writing.
annoying, yeah.
I think that, but the difference is that I don't think Tammy matches up with the goals of the writing.
Again, we've complained about James and Donna. But James and Donna have interesting moments. They have interesting elements and arcs. We may not universally love everything about them, but I think there's things to say about them. I think there's interesting things you can do and analyze about them. I think there's potential there. I think that even minor characters who only appear now and then have potential of interesting things.
Again, like, I think that even if you are set up with a bad tasting candy, like, as long as the whole candy's there, you know what the manufacturer was going for.
Yes.
This is where when I get Tammy Preston, I have half a candy bar. I open up the package of like a full-size candy bar. I open up and see half a candy bar there.
Yeah. And in part 17, she just sits there when Gordon Cole explains all this. And Albert also has very little to say. He gets a couple remarks in, but Tammy especially feels bizarre that she's just kind of sitting there with no input, no nothing. And she shows up at the end at the police station, doesn't have any moment to be there. She just kind of like, when all is said and done, now that we've finished the return and we look at what Tammy's done, I haven't received anything from her entire career in the FBI in the return that give me anything that shows me she has the stuff.
Tammy,
we got one interrogation that she did fine in, but no real defining characteristics compared to, again, the one interrogation Dale Cooper had with Bobby or the interrogation with Donna. We got immediate characterization out of his interrogations, or Chet Desmond, the way he interacts with people. I got nothing out of Tammy, and I wish that wasn't the case, because in Mark Frost's book, she had personality.
She had personality, and you could engage with it. If someone said that their favorite character is Tammy Preston, I would be almost convinced that it's coming straight from The Secret History.
Yeah.
Because inside of the contents of The Return, if we look into Tammy Preston on piece of paper, it's a good summary and it's a good pitch for a character. But we do not get anything other than Tammy's in the background of Gordon Cole. Gordon Cole stands too high, and Tammy sits inside of that shadow thanks to it.
I want to acknowledge a potential more positive reading of the character from another fellow Twin Peaks podcaster, and also someone who I think is very well respected and very acclaimed within the community.
Okay.
And that is from Joshua Minton, JB Minton.
Cheers.
Who is the author of A Skeleton Key to Twin Peaks and co-host of 2 Twin Peaks podcasts, In Our House Now, which is on The Return, and the Red Room podcast. So again, very, very influential thinker in the Twin Peaks community.
Fantastic.
Quote from Twitter, Tammy Preston is a tulpa of Dale Cooper in one layer of his dream. She holds his investigative instincts, divorced from his petulant Lancelot complex, free to seek out whatever truth lies in this archipelagic, I'm going to hope I say it. He uses big words. I hope I said that right. Archipelagic, like an archipelago or something like that. Narrative. There's a reason she is the frame for Mark's books. So there's a few ideas to break down here. One is that this kind of works on the assumption that Dale Cooper is the dreamer. So for right now, let's say that might be the case. We have our own theories we might say later, but
yes.
Dale Cooper, if he's the dreamer, you can view the characters within his dream as what he called a tulpa.
Yes.
I don't know if I use the word tulpa exactly that way at this time. Maybe I'll be convinced of that later. Right now, when I say tulpa, I usually mean a copy of someone like Diane had a tulpa or Dougie Jones was a tulpa. Maybe separate from a doppelganger, but very similar to a doppelganger. So when I think tulpa, I think clone. It sounds like what JB Minton here is saying is not that Tammy's a clone, but that Tammy is a tulpa by virtue of being a dream aspect. In which case, every character in Twin Peaks is a tulpa. Then, so if we establish all of that, the idea that Tammy represents the investigation instincts separated from what he calls the Lancelot complex, this sort of white knight hero complex to save women, etc.
Yes.
That she is pure investigation, seeking out the truth. What do you think about that?
Here's the thing. First, I'm going to table the idea of Lancelot and the Lancelot
court.
Lancelot, no, genuinely,
where
Dougie lives, but is visited and houses
Glastonbury Grove. There's a lot of things.
But still, like the Lancelot ideal, I want to still table for later, nonetheless.
Yes.
With this respect, it's something where, like, the idea that we have from tulpas, I think, again, a lot of Twin Peaks verges on both literal and metaphorical meanings. But for the instances we've seen tulpas that are confirmed tulpas, we only see just a very small handful of those instances. And the way that they die, exit this world, is very unique, to say the least.
You're referring to tulpa the way I usually mean it, with a sense of a clone or a duplicate. Yeah.
So seeing those clones and duplicates that are the confirmed tulpas on how they interact with the space and what we've seen from the scenes, Tammy would be so unique of a case, not only visually and not only physically, but also for the sake of style, that it's hard for me to separate. It's hard for me to feel the literal format.
Right, I don't think he means
feels
that.
like it's more metaphorical that she is like a tulpa.
I think Minton is referring to tulpa as the sense of a dream figure, and if it's Cooper's dream, everyone's a tulpa.
Yes.
It isn't meaning a clone or copy.
Yes. In any further respect beyond that, it's something of a reading that I can see for framework works well for Tammy, but nonetheless is not something that I'm fully convinced by, but mostly because the ideas towards the dreams, though it exists in tulpas, I still have dividing lines at the moment for them. Like, even if you are a false being, as long as you are real within the world, you are real. But you can have
So you
copies
object to
beyond
the idea of a
copies,
tulpa at
thanks
base.
to... At base, but that's only thanks to the existence of Dougie. Because Dougie, seeing as where he ends up, it's the hardest part about Dougie is that he's a copy of a copy. Thanks to the
Right.
doppelganger through Mr. C, and then being copied there, it seems like the Mr. C that we're... not Mr. C, Dougie that we're introduced to by the end that's clones directly
Yeah.
from Dale Cooper seems more well-adjusted as he's introduced from his family, from the small amounts of scenes that we see.
Right, and if we take just the word tulpa out of it for a moment,
Yes.
do you feel that, in any sense, Tammy represents pure investigation instincts like what Dale Cooper would have if he didn't have the Lancelot complex? Because I don't think it's there. I think it may be getting close in the Mark Frost books. I do not think it's there in the Return.
I think it's close in the Mark Frost books as well. It's a close thing, not quite there entirely.
I don't think she's ever as on-the-nose sharp, because a lot of what she does in The Secret History, and understandably given the format, is that she looks at something, she'll verify information, she'll occasionally give some musings, but I don't get pure investigation enough, only because I don't see her initiate a lot. She's just there to respond to something, and that's her job.
Yeah, it's her job. It is her occupation. She is doing as she was asked.
Yeah, I don't
through
think it gives enough opportunity for her to show pure 100% Dale Cooper level investigation because of the situation the dossier's in. The Return does allow for that, and we don't see it. She does not lead anything.
However, I still keep this framework in mind going into the final dossier because I think that the rating could be interesting because I don't know how
Yeah.
much Tammy is going to be poured into the final
So we'll
dossier.
have to resume and see if she becomes pure investigation in that time.
Yes.
Based on The Return, I would say that's a very favorable reading, and with much respect, I would say it's not substantiated in The Return. Now to the meat of Part 17.
You keep bringing up meat.
The nut meat.
The nut meat.
Yeah, like the meat of the almond.
Well, tell me more about the meat of the almond.
So Mr. C has been chasing these coordinates the whole entire series of The Return. It's one of the most concrete things we can point to for his motivations, and they led him to this woods in Twin Peaks. Now, this, from what I've understood, is interpreted to be the same area where the portal opened up with dropping Nido and Andy's vision. And it looks to be the same area as well upon inspection.
It's harder for me to recognize just because I don't recognize the sycamore tree at first. Maybe it was inside the background at the time. Not to mention, woods are woods. Trees are trees.
It's the pool, it's the oozing puddle and the smoke, and everything fits. So this is the portal area that they reach, which then would also be known as Jackrabbit's Palace. We're going to assume that they're one and the same, or at least very similar, because that's where Bobby was calling this place as well.
Potentially somewhat adjacent to this
Okay,
place.
so the portal opens up, and Mr. C is transported to where the Fireman's Theater is. We're going to call it that. And there's a Major Briggs head floating. We've talked ad nauseum
Yes.
about that. The firemen levitating there, very similar to Part 8.
Yes.
Notably, in this instance, Mr. C is in a square cage.
And also in the background, we see two iterations of what seem to be those strange bell shapes, which is
Yes.
also very similar to the kettle shape
Yes.
of good old Philip Jeffrey. So we could just say that potentially everyone's in attendance for this potential meeting of people who may want to act against Mr. C.
Yes.
As basically the scene is shown with the Sarah Palmer household
Yes.
right onto the screen. The giant still floating in that weird sort of like plague stage puts the hand up, swipes to the sheriff's station.
Like Tinder. He swipes left.
Like swipe in a direction. I don't know if he wants to bang houses, but we end up seeing this new space in which Mr. C is slowly floated into and shunted out to his own confusion.
So with all this said, I want to lay out some groundwork that we'll be pulling from later, just for a basis. Now,
Till that land.
there is some level of like assumptions that are going to happen here. I do not think this is
Yes.
foolproof. This is the best theory I have. It is also a very common conclusion. I don't know if everyone's reasons are the same as mine, but follow me and maybe you'll pick apart as well, Professor, if this tracks. We know that Mr. C has been looking for these coordinates.
Yes.
These coordinates lead to the portal.
Yes.
The default location that this would send him to is the Palmer household.
Yes.
The fact that Mr. C is in a cage and the fireman has been known to be against Mr. C and changes the location would assume to me that Mr. C was going to go to the Palmer house until the fireman intervened. That the fireman has changed the location of the output of that portal. With me so far.
With you so far.
Now, what would be at the Palmer house? the best guess we would have is that Mr. C has indicated before that what he wants is on this playing card that he showed to Daria.
Yes.
It is that black circle with the antennae. Now,
Yes.
that black circle with the antennae has been seen in one spot specifically and then alluded to maybe in 2 other spots. So the spot it's been seen specifically is on Hawk's map, the living map. And the way that Hawk describes it is like, that's an unspeakable thing you do not want to know about. It's awful. That sounds pretty similar to me to how Gordon Cole was describing Jowday. Now, there's some more you could dig into, but the central premise here is that, okay, maybe that this antenna head is similar to Jowday. Now, that begs a question. Does that line up with Mr. C meeting with Philip Jeffries? Because according to Mr. C, he did not know who Judy was. There's a couple ways you can rationalize this. One is that Jowday became Judy. He might just simply not recognize Judy as the name. He's used to Jowday.
Yes.
Sure. It could also be that he doesn't know it by a name at all, because what he's thinking about, he doesn't even have a name for. Again, I think it still works. I don't think it disproves that what he's seeking for may in fact be Jowday or Judy. He just didn't know it by that name. Philip Jeffries makes the comment that you've already met Jowday before. There's 2 ways that could work. If the thing that is Jowday is the experiment, that would match up because the circle with the antennae looks very similar to the head of the experiment in Part 8. Granted, you have to have good lighting and a good screen resolution to see it, but it is so, to me, on the spot that for the head to have those little antennae looking the way it does and it not be related would be a red herring of the highest degree. So I'm going to assume that, yeah, okay, the experiment is Jowday. It is the thing he's after. The other way you can interpret Philip Jeffries' remark is that if he's already met Jowday before, it could be a person that Dale Cooper had met before. Bring this all back. Who's at the Palmer house? Sarah Palmer.
I think it's very notable to use something such as a nuclear bomb explosion for the example of first seeing the experiment, because noting what the nuclear bomb does and what it causes, noting Jowday, if we are to take the Gordon Cole at his word, is an extremely negative force.
Right.
To say, even in the lightest terms, that the dropping of a nuclear bomb to cause an extreme negative force that introduces something like Bob to the world is, well, that is, I don't think I have to say much onto that. But let's also look, I think, time and time again, from Sarah Palmer's end. Using Jowday in this, and I want to go deeper into this later. We have a person who has been suffering for ages and ages. Someone who, inside this household, everything horrible has gone into, and we are left with someone who is very much not in a good place. To say that there's an extremely negative force coming from the Palmer household, for whatever reasons it may be, I'll talk about in the Judy end, but have that being a new place for her to chase a Jowday, if you will, I think it makes total sense in the narrative. And it especially makes an interesting microcosm in which, even if it is something very personal and small or something cataclysmic reading, even if it's big or small, seems of extreme negative force and where that experiment, the sense of like that Jowday can be birthed or erupted or handled, I think having that lead Mr. C and not fully know of that and have the mythical forces guide him to there, I think that all tracks inside of a single point.
And to clarify one quick thing before I continue here is that what I mean by Mr. C having met the experiment before is that inside of him is Bob, and Bob was birthed out of the vomit from either birthed out, like being born, or being teleported out of another dimension. Either way, came from the experiment.
Yes.
So whether or not it's someone Dale Cooper met, or whether or not it's someone that Bob had encountered, therefore Mr. C, both ways Philip Jeffries' message tracks. Now, this is a lot of assumptions and kind of things fitting. There's no exceptions to the rule, but I think one of the key pieces here you would need to lock in for this theory would be, okay, well then how is Sarah Palmer Judy or Jowday? How does that even connect? There is a potential lore or mythological way to explain this if you believe that in Part 8, the young girl, teenage girl, who the frog moth enters, is Sarah Palmer. And because of the timelines, because of the way things work, Sarah Palmer, I believe, to my understanding, is one of the only characters it could be if that young girl grows up to be someone else we know from the show.
Yeah.
Because this was set in like the 50s, she was that age, that presumably she would then match up age-wise with Sarah Palmer in the original series as well as the return.
Yes.
everything tracks. Like, we even looked up, like, Grace Zabrisky's birthday, and it was, like, kind of, it matched up pretty well.
It matched up pretty well. I will say that from what I'm understanding, either, and this is where it's where it's getting into some fun extremes here, either that is Sarah Palmer or that is what leads to the avatar of Sarah Palmer.
Yes. So all these implications, what it all means, put that on the stove burner for right now.
Let it burn.
I just want to establish the framework for why a lot of people, I believe this is their reasons, for thinking that Judy is Sarah Palmer is Judy. They are connected in a meaningful way from the frog moth of the vomit, of the experiment, leading into Sarah Palmer, that Sarah Palmer became an avatar or vehicle for an essence of Judy. That there may still be maybe a separate, bigger experiment Judy, because obviously we saw the experiment Slash and Dice, Sam and Tracy. That doesn't mean there can't be multiple instances of Judy's essence.
Yes.
That frog moth carried in some way to it. What I don't have right now, and what I'm interested to hear when we talk about Judy, is why. Like, Mr. C going to the Palmer house, being with Sarah Palmer, if that was his goal, he didn't know was the Palmer house, he didn't know was Sarah Palmer, but he wanted to go to where the coordinates would lead him. What would have happened if the firemen had not interceded? So, Mr. C ends up at the sheriff's department. He interacts with Andy, Lucy, and then Frank Truman. Clearly, the vibes are wrong. Clearly, things are messed up. I will say, even though I don't like Part 17, the eerie quality of having Mr. C interact with these people from Season 1 and 2 of Twin Peaks, it's good. I like there's a sort of tension, the irony that we know what he's like, but then also the palpable feeling that, like, they have to be able to sense something's wrong, too. But then the one who actually spends the most time with him is someone who never met him, so there's all those extra elements. I think that feeling of this malevolent force masquerading as an old friend just walking among them, I think there's something good there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't last very long, and it doesn't hit the way maybe I would have wanted, but I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting idea. I think that it is communicating with, but with the absence of Harry Truman and what I would think would be better and more concrete now, having maybe the position being taken up by Hawk, if you will, someone that's more personal.
Someone who actually knows him, yeah.
Yes, having someone personal sitting there and receiving the call and going into that sense of, like, trust, idea, and action, it's something that still remains flawed in my mind on what the execution ends up, but still, nonetheless, is still a fun integration of the character.
Yeah, I would wager that if Season 3 had happened in the 90s, that if it would have gotten renewed either before Fire Walk With Me or after or whatever, I would assume we would have had more instances like this in the sense of Dale Cooper being the doppelganger Cooper, pretending to be normal around his friends. The difference would have been that with the way The Return is written, we had hours and hours of content of Mr. C being Mr. C.
Yes.
So then to see him walking around wearing Dale Cooper's skin with his old friends hits a bit different in a way that I do appreciate.
Yes.
That is a specific thing that wouldn't have happened if we just went straight into Season 3 in the 90s. So that's cool. Meanwhile, at the same time, in the jail cell, we get some back and forth with Naito making sounds, reacting especially to Mr. C's presence, and Chad trying to escape, and the drunk imitating a lot of what's going on before falling asleep here.
Yes.
Chad, notable here in the sense of he does try to shoot Andy before being thwarted by Freddy, which is important for the sense that Freddy has to be useful in the next stage of the boss fight.
Yes, which, mind you, the most interesting thing I think inside the framework of this is that Andy's here, after saying that he was going to go get Hawk, runs out one side of the door, goes all the way to the prison cell, which maybe that's a pathway to Hawk, I don't know, but regardless, ends up like being faced with this conundrum. Green Glove guy goes through. He grabs nearly everyone from the jail cell except for the guy who is bleeding, and as well as Chad. Clearly doesn't want Chad to be involved with this, and brings them back through the opposite door in the office. Which, if there's this weird wraparound across the entire sheriff's station, seeing the sort of like flat like line, I doubt it. We've seen the sheriff's station, not only physically in our world, but also from outgoing shots. So already that fun inconsistency there. But also it doesn't seem like Hawk's notified until like there's a gunshot.
So I'll be honest, I don't believe this was intentional. I think this is just really confusing like writing and maybe editing of the scenes. unless you do believe in your heart of hearts that this was written in a way to be purposefully playful with continuity and with area locations, I think it's just poorly set up.
I think that it is something that's showing that there's something going on with Andy at the moment that's strange and consistent in between his visions as well and what's happening with the fireman. Maybe even like a heavy amount of influence that's overriding his natural functions that could lead into that
you can
mythical
read
end.
it positively or negatively depending on what you think was going on.
At the end of the day, those inconsistencies are still notable.
Yes, for sure. Mr. C tells Frank Truman that he's in Twin Peaks for unfinished business. And again, at this point, it's unclear maybe to viewers what exactly that might be, although we're kind of leading to some ideas now with the Palmer household. And it seems like at this point, Mr. C is not suspicious, which I find really curious. Was he aware that he was in a cage and sent to the wrong place? Like, because we see him there, but he didn't, his face was toward the camera, not toward the screen being changed.
Mm-hmm.
So is Mr. C aware that he has been sent to a different place?
I think so, because he looks at it and says, what is this place? And he's still willing to explore it. I think it's just because Mr. C, and by extension Bob, is confident enough in what he's doing that even if he's faced with this trap, he's still going to approach it in a fashion that still is going to be like, well, I have nowhere else to go.
Okay.
Let's see what's in
so
here.
You think he has no plan going in? He's just going in to take the bait.
He's going in to take the bait and overcome it because at the end of the day, like, yes, we do realize that the Green Glove will be able to destroy him, but does Bob know that? Or in this case, Mr. C know that? And being someone that is able
Bob
to...
is aware of Freddy enough in the moment to react.
He's
so
aware enough in the moment to react in that instance, but to know his existence in the first place, that's iffy. And also for the sake of, if I were someone who happened to be like nearly immortal by these weird like coal miners just kind of coming around to just like dig into my guts, rearrange things to bring me back, I would have a sense of confidence too.
I think this is more of just you have to do a lot of the legwork yourself to make any sense of anything. So Dale Cooper, kind of a rapid succession here. Frank is talking to Mr. C. Dale Cooper calls. Then Frank is made aware, wait a second, this isn't the real Cooper in front of me. Then Mr. C senses Frank's hesitation and realization. And then a weird thing happens that they both draw their guns, Frank and Mr. C. A gunshot occurs. We see Lucy is the one who shot the gun and had shot Mr. C.
Yes.
But in the midst of this, somehow Frank Truman's hat got lifted off of his head.
Yeah, it's like a Looney Tunes thing. Like, you know, I'm so good at dodging balls. Like, woo!
I want you to tell me what you think happened. Because there's no gunshot on the hat. It happens in a split moment, and the hat falls back down without ever showing any sign of the hat being shot.
It's one of those shaky foundations. I think that it's shaking up the foundation to note that everything is going against Mr. C. Everything is pre-planned, predetermined, and maybe these overarching hands
I love
are
that
just
when there's
trying
no
to...
sense of real conflict because everything's already predetermined.
Yeah, but at this point, like, it's more so it's like the perfect trap to the point that it's making Mr. C as powerless as possible.
So there's a Deus Ex Machina making it so Mr. C can't win, and that's good?
It's up to you on whether or not it's good. In this case, I find it to be entertaining, strange, and shakes the foundation in a way that I find flawed, but fulfilling for myself.
Yeah.
In your case, I can see it as, well, that's weird, and I don't feel great about this.
I feel
it's
like
going to be
it's
very independent at this point.
Really a non sequitur. Like, it just feels like a really unhelpful element to what's going on. Because it implies that, like, to me it implies that Mr. She... To me it implies that Mr. C had shot his gun, but it shot like a blank. Like, it shot no actual bullet. So a gust of air propelled out and hit the hat, but in an unnatural way, because normally it would blow the hat back.
Yes.
Instead, it blows the hat up.
Yes.
So my best guess is that, again, the fireman or some other spiritual entity is manually stopping this from making any sense and stopping it from working.
Yes.
And I find that to be, again, really uninteresting to the stakes of the situation, that it's so predetermined that that's the case. This is also where I think we can launch into the greater can of worms that is Frank Truman. We've talked at length throughout the podcast about Frank. At this point, I can now tell you that, from my understanding, Michael Onkean, the actor for Harry Truman, he was alive. My understanding, he was physically well, as far as I know, and to my understanding has never stated a clear reason why he did not return to the Twin Peaks with his role.
Yes.
The best guess we could have, I believe, after talking with other people in the Twin Peaks community, is that Michael Onkean had retired just a few years before. It was like 5 or 6 years before.
Yeah.
And chose to stay in retirement and not return to Twin Peaks.
Yes.
What I want to put forward here, and this is all speculation, this is not confirmed, but I want to put forward my honest thoughts and feelings, is that I would imagine David Lynch would bend over backwards to get Harry involved in some way, and by that extent get Michael Onkean involved, based on the way that he had the Skype call with Warren Frost, based on the way that he made sure to accommodate for Catherine Coulson, for the log lady. I think given how important Harry Truman is to Twin Peaks, I would say Harry is no less important than Dr. Hayward. Say how much? See what? Would you agree with that statement?
I agree with that
He's
statement.
not less.
Yes.
If Michael Onkean didn't appear, even in phone calls, we don't hear his voice. To me, that's a sign that Michael Onkean did not want to do it, even if it meant a one-time phone call.
Mind you, again, people's limitations, psychology, as well as recognition of their retirement. Like, the mindset of Michael Onkean is left unknown, and I think one thing that's very notable is that even with actors that may have taken breaks or times away from acting, I still see from time to time pop up into things such as the special features.
Yeah.
However, Michael Onkean, I've only seen once, but in a background detail of someone actually having a camera on the side.
He seems to be a more private
He may be more
person.
private than anyone else that we see
Right.
inside of Twin Peaks.
We also don't see other key players, too. Like, I don't think we've seen Donna's actor very much, like Laura Flynn Boyle.
No.
You know? So it is one of those situations where we don't have the full context. We may never have the full context. The moment that Michael Onkean says publicly in some format that he wanted to do it, he loved the script, but he wasn't able to, I'll believe him. 100%.
Hey, Mike, can I call you Mike? You know where to email us as well as to comment to us at this point.
SnakeEyeDreams@gmail.com.
Could you please tell us a little bit more about this information?
What I can't help but speculate, though, is withstanding that evidence, not having that, I'm wondering if he got the script for The Return. Again, all speculation here.
Yes.
Do not cite me.
Citing you right now with my eyes.
I wonder if he just turned it down. I wonder if he saw the script and saw what they were going to do with Harry and realized he didn't want to do it. And let me paint why I would say that might be the possibility, is if I'm imagining I'm the actor for Harry, I loved working with Kyle MacLachlan. We had this great dynamic in the show, and also had this dynamic, obviously, with Josie and Wibis of the law enforcement.
Yeah.
And in The Return, assuming that Frank Truman is what Harry was going to be, and I think that's actually a pretty good argument that that's the case, he would have spent most of The Return doing some phone calls, visiting a couple people, generally having some marital problems, and then his interaction with Kyle MacLachlan is limited to an interaction with the evil Mr. C, and then maybe one or two words with actual Dale Cooper before the end of everything here. I would maybe look at that and be like, this is not the character I wanted to be. That's what I might feel.
That's what you might feel. And I do think that that's where the personal angle comes in. And maybe that might be a case, but I see it in the same respects on like how I can see like maybe Goran Cole did something in the 25 years. It is something in so heavy as speculation.
It also leans into why I think Frank Truman is an uninteresting role.
Yeah.
And again, say what, Robert Forster, I know, is a very talented actor. He was in line to be Harry. I think the character of Frank Truman amounted to very, very little for me. As a viewer, when I think of characters of Twin Peaks, even characters in the law enforcement, I do not think of Frank Truman at the top.
Frank Truman is written in to be another true man. And that's it. It very much feels like you could have put Michael Onkean's role as Harry Truman inside of it.
Yes.
Just cut out all the scenes that
have
are talking
Harry
about.
be married in this unfavorable
He
situation.
calls himself in the hospital.
No, I mean, in all seriousness, though, if you remove the phone calls to Harry and you just have now Harry is the one who's in this marriage, he's the one doing all these different things, nothing changed. It literally would be the exact same thing.
I agree.
So this is where I go back to my old statement, Hawk should have been sheriff.
Hawk should have been sheriff.
It all depends on when they knew what. If they didn't know Michael Onkean was going to be involved until too late, they couldn't write the character out, they just had to replace. I understand you don't want to recast Harry Truman.
Yeah.
I would rather they invent this new brother character, put him barely mentioned in the book to set it up, have a new brother character, fulfill the same role so the script can be kept intact as much as possible, have a few phone calls to Harry so we know that, what kind of happened to the character. I get why this might be a thing you have to do if you're not given a lot of time to react. If, however, they had the time to plan in advance, I wish they would have removed the Harry Truman, Frank Truman role, reallocated things to Hawk, maybe some things to Andy if necessary, maybe some things to Lucy if necessary. And I just think that Frank kind of wasn't helpful to the story.
Yeah.
And having the Mr. C encounter, it's kind of interesting having Mr. C talk to someone who doesn't know him, but it's also like, how much more powerful would this moment have been if it had been Harry Truman?
Absolutely.
Like, this final conversation is Harry Truman looking at his old friend who he used to have such amazing chemistry with. And it's Mr. C.
I think more than anything, it's the trust that puts into the phone call. Instead of like going on more what seems to be maybe a spiritual whim or just something predestined, having someone that knows him and hears his voice and is looking at another person whose tone might have like made this like off-putting sort of like stare down go through. I think it also strengthens the phone call with actually like Dale Cooper.
Do you attribute any significance, plot-wise or thematically, to Lucy being the one to shoot Mr. C? Because I don't. I don't see any meaning. Not that it has to, but it's like I don't see that there's like a reason why it would be.
Killing a receiver of information, killing the cell phone.
I don't know
that's the closest thing that I can
really
think of.
rough.
Because we're dealing with electricity, we're dealing with those like receivers that aren't attached to any lines. Mr. C is detached. That's the best thing I can come up with.
Okay.
She kills the cell phone. Mr. Cell Phone.
Because if it had been Hawk in the exact same situation,
he can't kill Mr. Cell Phone. Mr. Cell Phone too powerful. It had to be Lucy to finish that arc.
It's really weird. Like looking at it between Frank's role and Lucy's role and Andy's role, it's really weird how absent Hawk is. Like you were saying before, it's unclear if he like even knew to be there before the gunshot. I think he heard the gunshot and came running. That's how it came across to me, even though Andy again was supposed to go look for him.
Yes.
I feel it's weird that after all the setup Hawk has had in the return, he's just kind of walks in late, asks what's going on, and then gets an answer, and then that's it. He's just there.
Yes,
he's one of the many bodies that are in this room.
We already went past Hawk's heritage. What more do we need?
Hey, you know what time it is?
No.
No, hold on. You know what time it is? It's time to count how many people are in the room. This whoosh sound has been an all-purpose sound effect to signify a new segment I'm calling How Many People Can Fit in Maximum Capacity in the Sheriff's Station.
This seems like a fire hazard of a section.
So, Mr. C is on the ground. Frank Truman is there. Andy's there. Freddy, Nido, James enter after Andy. Hawk joins. Lucy joins. We're at 8 currently. Dale Cooper comes running in with the Mitchum brothers. We are now at 11 people. Later, Bobby enters, 12. Gordon Cole, 13. Albert and Tammy, 14, 15. And then you add on Candy, Mandy, and Sandy for 18 people.
You're not done yet!
I'm not done yet.
You're not done yet! We almost forgot the dirty coal miner woodsman people who also come in. So we have to have 3 more unnamed people.
So that's actually the real reason they were dangerous, is because that put the room over maximum capacity. It became a real fire hazard when they started appearing.
Oh, you're really a fire hazard. You don't say.
Yeah, and then Bob, if you count that as a separate person. My point is there were 18 characters standing in this room.
21 to 22 characters, yes.
Whatever you want to categorize it as. I'm curious with your thoughts. When all is said and done, do you like everyone being there in that room? Do you feel like anyone was there that didn't need to be? Do you feel like anyone was missing that should have been there?
It's a duality of a question, because do I think that there were any people that shouldn't have been here? Plenty! Do I think to myself that having them all there adds anything? Yes, because it is something that not only you were all there, right. Everyone is there, everyone has kind of like come together into the singular
It's the curtain
spot.
Call.
It's a curtain call. It's
not really, because the curtain call's later.
He's calling for the curtain. The curtain is closing. It's a curtain call that says, one curtain closes for it to open again, a new act begins.
Perhaps so. Bob. Freddy.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob.
I'm going to hit you with the most startling information.
You love this scene as much as I did.
I hate this scene. This scene...
As much as I loved it?
I don't know if it's my worst scene of all Twin Peaks, because there have been some real zingers with some moments in the return. But this is so ludicrously bad. I don't know what theory about Twin Peaks would justify this for me. Bob emerging from Mr. C... Freddy, this is me destiny, puts on, already has the Hulk glove on,
can never take it off.
Punches Bob into hell, or at least into a hole in the ground that burns on fire. The Bob orb reemerges, and then Freddy punches to shatter him. What the shattering implies, up to you. Do you think that's the death of Bob? Is it, since the fragments move up or whatever, does that mean like Bob is still alive but like just removed from the situation? Do you have to insert a coin to continue? What does this mean for Bob? I would say, regardless of what you feel, Bob is defeated by Freddy.
It is something where I think that Bob is defeated by Freddy. Bob is completely defeated, and I think it's notable for 2 things. One,
how bad it is.
I will say before I get to these two things, I do love the cinematography, but also in that same way that it's acknowledging...
You like the special effects.
I love the style the return goes for, which does apply to the special effects, the framing, the camera movements. A lot of it I'm in love with. And maybe it's not for the correct emotions, quote, what I'm supposed to be feeling, because when you were watching it with me, I was laughing out loud through this. But again...
I was laughing out of pain.
I was having a great old time. But... he punches down, and that's where things are set aflame before Bob returns up. He punches, and then it goes up. And instead of making a hole in the ground, it sends and clips through the top of the ceiling like a Gary's Mod situation, where it just like disappears off into the distance, not detecting the ceiling. I think this is notable because the physical framework of what Bob was within for that Mr. C, we see later on in part 18, sitting still, non-reactionary, on fire, almost like an empty vessel, if you will.
It's very fun. I think starting part 18 with the image and loud sounds of Mr. C on fire is very funny.
But the physical form caused a physicality in part 17 when Bob is punched down and makes a hole. Meanwhile, when Bob is defeated and sort of like disappears into the air and sort of is gone, I feel is a true final death for Bob. Just because it fits enough, seeing as we don't see even a remnant or an inkling of Bob or Doppelganger in Mr. C later on.
That's all very lovely, Professor. I really am happy for you. I'm going to put a sticker on your assignment. You get a B-. Congratulations.
Yay! I passed!
I don't think I have to explain why I don't like Freddy.
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing. I feel like there's some things I want to qualify, I want to explain, I want to nuance. I do not know if anyone listening, I need to convey why someone might viscerally dislike having a character who we barely got to know suddenly show up in an episode, go on like a 5 to 10 minute, however, probably 5 minute long exposition about their backstory. We don't see anything, we're just told about it. Then he shows up, incapacitates Chad, and punches the evil that men do out of existence in a punch fight. Why that might be a problem for someone who loves the idea of Bob as a psychological representation of trauma, of masking. The reasons why I like The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, I don't know if there's anything in Twin Peaks more opposed to The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer than Freddy versus Bob boss battle.
No, absolutely. I understand where that comes from, because in this case, it's very much in a black and white sense, maybe not in lodge form, but in chessboard form. This Deus Ex...
Rock'em Sock'em Robots is probably the better app comparison.
No. I think chessboard is perfect, not only for the black and whites, but also for the sake of underhanded and backseat tactics of being like distracting with all these elements. And meanwhile, the fireman pulls a rook at the back end to try to catch him off guard in order to try to finally finish off the king in the back while being surrounded by other pieces. I think that you can actually play a fun chess metaphor when it comes to the plannings of the firemen, but it does make it, for many people, unfulfilling, because it still is bringing up a British Deus Ex Machina.
See, like, there are a lot of stories out there where the hero is a chosen one who maybe has a magical weapon or a magical power that makes them uniquely equipped to defeat the bad guy. It might be a chosen hero or knight who has a sword that can cut through this monster or something.
Yes.
That is the situation of Freddy. But imagine that character is not the main character. Mm-hmm. Imagine that character only takes up maybe 1% of the total screen time.
Yes.
And imagine that the villain that they are fighting has been in the past used to represent abuse, assault, incest, horrible things, and has always been on the fringe of maybe not corporeal, maybe corporeal. And one of the most interesting things about them was that sense of like, how real are they? How real are they not? What does that mean? To put the idea of the chosen hero with the magic weapon into this narrative, I find is not only badly set up because of how little Freddy is actually utilized.
Yes.
Not only is it badly set up because of all enemies, Bob is who you chose to defeat this way. It's such a bad resolution for this character.
Yes.
It's also just terrible. I don't agree with the visuals and the way you present it. It is, to me, laughably bad. It is something that, like, it's just this dumb-looking orb with Bob's face on it going, rah, 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 rah. and then this is my destiny, and oh, he's getting beat up, then he punches him, oh, he's getting beat. I don't know what to say about it. Like, I don't know, blah, 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 parallel to the boxing match that Sarah Palmer was watching, blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blanks there if you want. I find this to be underwhelming and bad from almost every angle, and Freddy is just this situation where, like, maybe this could have been interesting if he was a character. Maybe it would have been interesting if Bob was something that made sense to defeat with a glove. But it just doesn't work on any conceivable level for me.
At this point, the most conceivable levels I can are from the interpretive metaphors, not only in the color green being the aspects of the dreams overcoming, as well as what we've seen from the fireman, in which I do think that he is very much acting as that avatar, using this green jade glove.
When the world needed him most, Freddy was there.
Exactly. It's something that works in the mythological ends, but it is not something focused on that mythology because we're following completely different characters from it. It's something happening into the side that coalesces to a finale.
Following. He just asserts himself at the end.
He asserts, but that's the thing. We don't follow that character. We have him in instances, but we follow everyone else around it as these other avatars are working in the background.
And I think almost any form of criticism I could levy against The Return or other pieces of media, it's got to be contextual.
Yes.
Is there a situation in which I could find great enjoyment out of nowhere, the real hero coming in and defeating the bad guy when we didn't even know the guy? Like, it could be a comical moment that we've spent this whole entire story preparing for something, and then at the very end, some random hero shows up with his weapon and defeats the big bad. Could I find that funny in some executions? Yes.
Yes.
This is not that story for me.
I don't think it's that framework, and I don't think it's that tale. I think that, as you said, it comes up in a sense of humor. And I don't think you're going to get that much humor out of it.
What did it mean to you? What do you like about, like, not the visual effects? I mean, that's obviously something you like. Mm-hmm. But from a story's perspective, how do you feel about Bob, the evil that men do, whatever you think Bob represents, being defeated by Freddy with a green glove?
So for clarification, the chess match that's happening for the black and whites for both sides to go through, I do think that the fireman acting as putting all these pieces into play and having this rook play in the background, that being Freddy, is something where these forces in the mythology trying to act against Bob at the end of the day, which seems to represent an opposing end. This is just a triumphant outcome of entities far gone that we have to step ourselves away from in order to kind of see the scope on. And in that respect, it's fun in a mythological sense, or fun to see as a growth towards the fireman's character. As a finale bit, I find it humorous in its flaws.
I don't believe that I am alone in disliking this Freddy scene. And I think some people, even if they love The Return, also might have some problems with it. And one of the responses I've seen to this feeling is I have seen in the past, maybe there's still people who feel this way now, the reading that Freddy defeating Bob with the green glove is purposefully bad. Mm-hmm. That it is meant to make a point. And a lot of times what people will do is they will say that the ending of 17 with Freddy is meant to show a more stereotypical ending with a superhero type of media, where the hero defeats the villain with the big weapon, and it's meant to be flashy with no substance, and it's meant to be thin with no substance. I do not believe that David Lynch and Mark Frost are using this as a situation to parody, satirize, or comment on superhero media or classical storytelling. I think it is what it is. No, that's my feeling.
Yeah, I do think it is what it is. I do think it's experienced, mostly because this style of cinematography and this course we've been seeing has been present through The Return.
I think for a lot of people who love The Return, there might be a pressure to reinterpret Freddy this way because it makes everything still work out. But I would challenge those who love The Return to consider that maybe the thing is just bad. Maybe it's not bad for a reason, or maybe you want to take the professor stance here and that it's good, actually. But I don't think it's bad on purpose. It's either good or it's bad. I don't think it's bad on purpose, unless there's better evidence. I haven't seen that evidence in The Return or in other David Lynch media that he would do that, and it just doesn't read that way to me.
He's someone that may try to talk about uncomfortable ideas and will talk about things that he believes as truths in a new context, but I haven't seen many cases where he comes forward and tries to make commentary on the outside, like, in a way that's trying to be like, hey, here's your commentary before he dances with the cane off the stage.
May I say a positive thing about Part 17 in this section?
Please.
I really like the music that plays when the woodsmen are working on Mr. C and Bob comes out.
Yes.
That very haunting, slow, not quite like Dark Circus kind of vibes, but it's that organ-y kind of music that's playing in there. It's very eerie. It creates a very jarring mood. The lighting getting dimmer, seeing Dale Cooper running into the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
I think the mood of that particular moment before the boss fight
Yes.
is very good.
It is very good. I think it's very solid. I think that when it comes to a tone setter, they do accomplish it well. I think that both at that moment, at the end of the fight, as well as, maybe you'll disagree with me, post-fight, in which we have that, like, thick atmosphere built up with Dale Cooper's, like, faded, opacity to face.
Yes, I do
lingers.
really like that image. I really like that image as well. It's the meat, the nut meat, the almond meat in between. You take a piece of bread, take another piece of bread. It's good bread. It's well-made bread.
So,
in between, you filled it with nuts. It's a sandwich made out of almonds, and that does not work from a textural standpoint. It doesn't work from like you're gonna bite into it, and all the almonds are gonna fall out. Maybe if it was an Uncrustable where it was like sealed, it might work.
It's like, maybe a better thing is not like all meat. Maybe it's like a cashew meat, which you're supposed to like eat the middle of the cashew, but you feel that you just like bit straight into the whole cashew, and you're like, oh God, these shards are just everywhere. This is horribly uncomfortable. Why is it like this? But then you get to like the end of it, like, oh, that's a nice flavor. After the shards have passed through your system.
Like a shelled cashew?
Like a shelled cashew, yes.
Oh, I've never seen a shelled cashew. I haven't. I've only
Oh,
seen...
wait, pistachio. That's
Oh,
what
you
I'm
meant
thinking of.
pistachio?
I meant pistachio.
I was trying to figure it out because cashews normally don't come shelled. Like they normally come shelled. They don't come, unshelled. Pistachio. That makes a lot more sense.
That's delicious pistachio.
I bit into a... Okay. I got you now. We're all good. And you know what the green inside is? That's the glove.
Yep, the green inside.
No, that's the bad part.
No, that's the bad part. It's reverse. It's like the interior is like some.
It's a
new
reverse
color.
pistachio where the green part is on the outside. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, the whole idea of having the superimposed Dale Cooper, it's very ominous. It's very eerie because it does a very good, I think, juxtaposition where we have Dale Cooper saying very confidently all these things, and it has a sort of positive tone. Don't get me wrong, there's some bittersweet elements of a goodbye, but the tone of what he's saying seems a lot more positive as an ending. But then there's this face that looks like, I don't know what I would say. It's almost either between emotionless, but then also just like a tinge of like eerie quality to it. And then that slow, we live inside a dream. That just, again, there's some kind of jarring nature here. Now, I want to highlight something, whether we take it and leave it or take it and run with it.
Yes.
The moment where that begins is that Cooper gets the hotel room key from Frank, who I guess had not had a chance to give it to Harry yet.
Yeah.
And, Cooper tells Bobby, what your father has done. And Cooper tells Bobby, your father's well aware of what's happening here. This has all been kind of set up for us. We get Nido stepping forward, and Nido's face cracks open. We see the red room, and then it's Diane now. The moment when we get the superimposed image is when Cooper sees Nido and then thus Diane. What I find weird, and maybe worth some query here, is what exactly happened, because Cooper seems otherwise very confident, very sure of things. This is all going according to some kind of plan. But when he sees Nido/Diane, there's this look of, like, confusion. Like, he looks at her and he doesn't expect her to be there, is the reading I get.
Yeah.
Everyone else, he's totally cool with being there. He knew this person and this person and this person were going to be there. He knew about the room key. He knew where he was going. He knew all those other things. But he didn't seem to understand Nido being there. I don't know if it's because of the form Nido has. He didn't expect it to look like Nido. Maybe when it became Diane, it was normal again. But I find it weird, potentially important, maybe not, that the moment the superimposed image starts is when that happens.
I think that
there's like a schism.
There's a schism. And that comes to question, like, what is Nido at this point?
Right.
I think that when we see the effects happen, very similar to the falsehoods or the tulpas, where, like, something happens to the physical form and then the Red Room is involved. We've seen the Red Room sprinkled, like, throughout the world in a way whenever it needs to, like, phase in and phase out.
I just had an idea.
Go for it.
I don't know if this tracks because of a key difference between the elements. But anytime we've seen like situations with like tulpa or tulpa-like entities and like something happens with their head or face, I think of the Red Room when their faces do the cracking and the orbs glow and stuff, and we see Philip Gerard have to look away.
Yes.
Now, part of me wants to suggest the idea in my head is like, Dale Cooper did not look away. He looked at the transformation. Did that do something? The difference I get, though, is that it doesn't have the same light effect. It's not exactly the same.
No.
That's what makes me want to say, like, wait a second. Did something happen wrong or unexpected because he didn't look away from the transformation? But does it matter that it's not one-to-one with what happened with the other transformations we'd previously seen?
I think it's most certainly Chewie with that. I think that the difference between this sense of like transformation is that it's not a transformation. I'm using the context of the Red Room appearing in certain zones, as well as the existence of Nido being a potential just false entity. And you could go as far as Topla if you'd like, but I just take her as a false entity and then connect that to the end of season 2, in which, say, for example, Annie is a key or doorway that leads into a situation with the Red Room. In this case, I interpret Nido as a key or doorway that allows Diane to enter back in. Because as we recall, Diane was stuffed away thanks to Mr. C, and instead, the Tulpa was going to take her place out externally. So, but then again, what does that do for poor old Nido?
I also want to bring up the potential criticisms of Nido as a character. In Twin Peaks: The Return, we only have 2 recurring main, if you want to call them main, characters that are non-white. Hawk is obviously the most known character, a returning character from the original, who we still call Hawk, even though in The Secret History, I think he had fairly good arguments against using that name, but The Return still does use that name.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have that character. And then we have Nido as the only Asian character in the particular work. And Nido's character is voiceless, is purposefully made to look jarring and kind of unsettling in appearance. And then Nido is basically erased so a white woman can speak and exist. And I do think that there are ways to criticize this in the sense that Twin Peaks: The Return has a very predominantly white cast in a way that is far and above what I see in most television shows, I guess, in terms of like homogeny, despite being in multiple locations, in multiple dimensions even. But not only that, again, multiple states, multiple cities.
Yeah.
There is a startling lack of characters from any other background or ethnicity. And the one Asian character here is Nido. I think these criticisms were brought up by Cezanne Kohler, who I had mentioned previously, appeared in Laura's Ghost. And I am not the best person to criticize this in the sense that I am a white person speaking this. But if I was a fan of Twin Peaks, a person of color, I could see maybe a sense, and again, just guessing how I might feel in that hypothetical, that this show does not really have a place for me as much, because you're using all the very, very few characters you have who are not white basically as interchangeable plot devices. Nido's not even a character. Is this better or worse than season 2? I mean, that had Tojimura, but at least with Tojimura, you had Josie to balance against that. I don't know if there is any redemption for Nido here as a plot device. It kind of bothers me, and it's another instance of David Lynch using someone with an unusual appearance for shock value, potentially. He has a history of doing this where someone's really tall, or someone's really short, or someone's got a face disfigurement, or someone's got some weird proportions. They're the supernatural ones, and I can read a negative into that. Like, I could see an argument that people with different appearances are othered. And that can be a bit unsettling. You can't just have a regular person in Twin Peaks that has like a disability or has like something different about their body. That to me is a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not saying it ruins the entire show for me, but I will say I can understand the concern.
It's something which, mind you, one of the people who has a potential disability that, well, actually, there's a few characters that do have notable disabilities, but one with more camera time inside the original Twin Peaks, it's almost as if there's a potential layer of mythical that might be applied to
Harold?
her. Not Harold,
okay.
For Donna's mother, which is a character of a disability representation
Fair enough.
that is inside a wheelchair.
I don't know. I guess my question for you is, what do you think of Nido now? Like, what do you think was going on with Nido as an entity in the previous Mauve Zone, as well as now that you have the context of Diane either being within the shell or swapping places? What is Naito? You mentioned that she's a doorway, I think. Like,
Yes.
What do you like about that? Why is that there? Why do that?
I think that at the end of the day, it continues to probably be the larger scheme of plans of the firemen working in the background or entities similar to the firemen working in the background in something that will either A, be the final reward for Dale Cooper at the end of his long journey, or B, throw things off for Mr. C if he plans on just keeping Diane in this small little corner and allow a means of transport. I think that if we go for the doppelganger angle, if we see the actions of Naito slapping at Dale Cooper, stopping him, but at the same time the experiment slashing at these other people, doppelgangers of the good and the evil, the yin and the yang, this is where this entity is going to be more giving. It's the kindnesses of the world as versed with the great evils of the world. So in this case, this entity either is an open hand or is an entity that gives an open hand to give forward for something good.
So when Dale Cooper's face is superimposed, we live inside of a dream. Why is that there?
That is there simply because it's to create not only a dissonance for the audience on what's going through Dale Cooper's head, recognizing the people around, but also the feel of the atmosphere being like, we live inside this dream of foreboding essence around all these people. That to look at all these people, to then have him look across all these entities, all these beings, and say, I hope I can see you later on. Almost in that like longing sense, that goodbye sense, that worries. I think that Naito exists inside of this realm, for sure, but it's not directed at Naito specifically.
So when it started is arbitrary?
Arbitrary, yes. If anything, if it's less than arbitrary, it's timing for tone.
I think this is great fuel if you believe Dale Cooper's the dreamer. I think having that image superimposed, we live inside a dream, very Wizard of Oz type mentality here. If you believe Dale Cooper is the dreamer, I think that this is a really easy thing to attach to that theory.
Meanwhile, the counter that I put up to that theory, and there will be more counters to come, is the fact that recognizing that you live inside of the dream and that absent face of it may be something that is more in a doom-like way, recognizing the realm around him being his truth, but as a greater falsehood. That it is something that he has to live with and understand, seeing all these characters.
Okay. Dale Cooper and Diane kiss. She says she remembers everything. What do you think everything entails?
I think she remembers everything is meaning that she can recall all the events not only for herself as Diane, but even potentially her Tulpa Diane. I think that she recalls everything that needs to be known up to this point. I think that she's all caught up. She potentially also remembers Naito. I think that from the presence of being in this omnipotent zone and the potential insight that can give forward, I think having a character that says that she's all caught up is notable, especially since Diane is literally the record keeper, is the one that is the one receiving all of Dale Cooper's notes.
Aren't you glad that someone knows what's going on in Twin Peaks?
I'm fairly confident.
Your downfall. I look at this and I guess the two things that strike me is, one, I remember everything has the positive potential connotation that she remembers the plans that Dale Cooper had confided with her. Because as part 17 continues, and especially in part 18, she seems to be on the same page with Dale Cooper about what they're doing. She seems to not have a lot of questions. She seems to know where they're going and why they're doing it. So I'm going to assume that off screen, at some unknown point, Dale Cooper had communicated to Diane some semblance of a plan that gets acted out in 17 and 18, especially 18 when it comes to Diane. That's also, I think, what's being said with I remember everything. Again, we don't know what that is, but she does.
Yes.
I also think there's a dark connotation of she remembers what Mr. C did.
I think that that's also true, especially with the later scene in part 18.
Because
I think
everything
she does
would have to include
everything.
So she says it in an almost positive tone, but there is a darker element that's being remembered as well. An incredibly traumatic, horrible incident that no doubt would change the way that she would look at Dale Cooper in immense ways. Because there is this element that we have to, again, confront when it comes to the doppelganger and Mr. C. That although doppelganger Mr. C changed over time and maybe became his own person, you could argue, at the beginning, he started out as being the type from the Red Room, and one of the readings you can put forward, I think it's the strongest reading, and it is personally my reading, is looking at the doppelganger as the shadow self,
Yes.
and therefore being the darker elements of one's own psyche. What I mean by that is that whatever doppelganger was at the beginning, when he first left the Red Room, is part of Dale Cooper gone loose. That would indicate to me that the early form of Mr. C, the early form of the doppelganger, even if maybe not later, but the early form was doing things that Dale Cooper in some way was capable of and in some way wanted. That means that Diane would have to confront that if she was attacked by Dale Cooper early into this situation, this might not be a different person wearing his face. This might be something that Dale Cooper, her Dale Cooper, was capable of and secretly in a very dark part of his consciousness would have wanted. This isn't just some random thing she can separate. Oh, he just looks like you. No, he might have been a part of him.
Yes.
How do you walk away from that? How do you step away from it? I don't think the Return is equipped to handle that. I think the Return is much more interested in telling you really dumb time travel stories and really dumb supernatural stuff that confront real human emotions. And I'm going to get mad and heated about that as we talk.
Meanwhile, I'm looking at it in a sense of not only this very horrifying, complicated end, which leads into a beautiful scene in the most horrifying way in part 18, but I also look at it in the greater whole of Mr. C that affected Diane was noted for being smiling, and I don't think that Mr. C's cracked a smile at any point throughout the Return. I think what the Return does very well in the sense of mythology is showing that everything is bound to evolve and change with the duration of time.
Except for Ed and Norma.
Ed and Norma?
They're trapped in stasis.
I think they were broken out of it thanks to Nadine. It just took a very long time. We were able to break that shell. But it's where, like, without much context of the Beyond, but more so for the reasoning, we see Philip Gerard more present in the Red Room as someone who seems to be more of an acting agent. We see the evolution of the arm, which is acting inside there. We see the fireman no longer taking the place as the giant, but that could be a potential shift inside of that zone, however the time may go. We see Mr. C changing, as well as, I would say, by some extension, Bob, evolving into a new nature. Evolution and those shifts and changes are inevitable nonetheless. And I do think that it comes across well enough through the show that even with all this evolution that has changed, there is still that uneasiness and that horror that Diane confronts and realizes that it is something unbearable, and reasonably so.
I think we get pretty good evidence that Philip Gerard was a woodsman previously. I think it's enough for my headcanon, at least, that when he is walking, he does the fire walk with me chant, and then he leads Dale Cooper into the convenience store. He does the exact same kind of thing that the woodsman did with Mr. C, just from the opposite side.
Yes, he does it from... he still leads them across there into the same goal.
But flipped. It's flipped, which one's on the left, which one's on the right.
Yes. It's something that you could argue that maybe the Dutchman is just more than the convenience store itself. That is just, again, that form of transport. Or it's just that this man knows the pass through, so he's like, here, I'll help you through this special secret shortcut.
There's enough evidence based on the original show just saying he was his familiar.
Yes.
The closest thing we see to Bob's familiar would be the woodsman.
Yes.
And I think it's like enough that if it's not outright confirmed, I think it's pretty solid. I will say, just as a quick aside, the amount of times I see, like, even the Twin Peaks wiki bounce between saying Philip Gerard versus Mike, I think the credits have always said Philip Gerard. I'm not even sure if Mike has ever been said in the Return.
I don't think so.
I continue to say Philip Gerard, but I want to note that when I was doing like summaries and stuff, I kept seeing Mike pop up, so I'm a little uncertain.
I think that, if I might...
If you Mike.
This is the evolution of Philip Gerard and Mike. It's where both sides kind of come in to mold into the one being that now resides inside of the Red Room, where the recognition of this new form and reality of him is why this is Philip Gerard now, who is abandoned his past with Mike and is now acting as an agent, probably in some form of tandem with the fireman to continue forward, as the arm is no longer the arm, it's now the evolution of the arm. The name and the context of it, I think, are important for the background summary of what has changed.
I feel like, the human side is gone. I feel like the human side was, like, erased. I don't feel it as a union. I feel it as a further separation. There's this recurring thing with a lot of the characters who are in the Mauve Zone or Red Room, however you want to view these spaces, that they feel less human as time goes on, that the evolution of the arm, the evolution is to become less human, that Philip Gerard had to abandon basically his human entity side to be what he is now, and even down to what Philip Jeffries and Major Briggs have become. They do not feel like they have their humanity as well. And instead it's kind of a sterile, cold, emotionless kind of state that seems like a bad ending. This seems like you do not want to ascend. You do not want to be involved in this. I would not want to be taken to those zones and become what they are becoming.
At this point, it's as if the zones themselves are an active participating job or sense of service that these people are anchored to more than it is to freedom. Because I think the human element at the end of the day, are flaws in autonomy. Something that, if the flaws are emphasized, it's going to be a moving, momentous force, similar to the horrors that can be brought on by Bob.
I'm just also then confused, though, where Dale Cooper has been here for 25 years. Has he similarly evolved in the Red Room space? He hasn't changed his physical form.
Not physical.
When he appears, I am the FBI, it seems like Dale Cooper.
I think that with the physical form, I think that he has evolved, but not in a physical way. Very similar to Philip Jeffries, not Philip Jeffries, Philip Gerard. So many Phillips. I think he's evolved in the same sense of Philip Gerard, maybe not for the most positive ends, but at the end of the day, for the role he is to take on, I do think that a lot of the things that Mr. C kind of drew from him was also the processing center of it being shunted away from Cooper. And I think that the complex that I see more from Cooper inside of The Return comes in that Lancelot property, where he has to become that hero, that has to become the person that overcomes things and is trying to do things for a betterment he believes in, most notably because of what happens with what he's willing to do with Laura Palmer.
When we read The Secret History of Twin Peaks, a lot of work was done by Mark Frost to correlate and strongly suggest the idea that the Lodge entities have a correlation or connection to UFOs and aliens.
Yes.
Do you think that paid off in The Return? Because I have zero idea what to do with that, because it doesn't feel like the same thing at all. It doesn't feel like it connects to any of the Greymen, Lumerian kind of stuff. The best you can get is that there are portals sometimes.
I think I put in the same connection that the Red Room feels different, and you see different things depending on which property you are going with, whether it is Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, or The Return, in the respects that these gray men, these beings, are more so reflexive by the people that are viewing them or the emotional state they are being viewed in. I think the ideas towards UFOs are being recontextualized, not from like the ideas that they necessarily come from spaces in the physical cosmos, but kind of like blend into that spiritual and ideal sense.
I take back what I said, because actually I think in some ways it does work. There's obviously the connection many people have made between the alien presences and what we see with the experiment, this cold, dispassionate, potentially violent force, not too different from maybe what was witnessed below with Richard Nixon showing the potential alien to our original Dougie. But there's also the element of viewing alien abductions. I would say that Andy got abducted.
I think Andy got abducted. I think the idea of looking up to the sky, something unidentified flying in the air, and I suppose a hole can be an object, you get shunted into that hole, and then during that time you were absent from everyone.
Yeah, I got abducted. So I can see it. I just, again, I'm not sure it 100% feels the same, but maybe I'm a bit too quick to completely rule against it. I would just say that it feels like The Return might give maybe more to Secret History, but I'm not sure the Secret History gives more to The Return. Like, I don't know how helpful, like, if, for example, if we had skipped the Secret History of Twin Peaks, and you just watched The Return,
I wouldn't have
how much would change?
Not much. Genuinely,
it just doesn't have much connection.
Other than being like, hey, Tammy, what's up?
But I do think if you go back to the Secret History now, there would be some things that you would think about. So I feel like, again, it's not even that situation. And make of that what you will. Speaking of make of that what you will, my hands go up in the air, and I'm waving them like I do care because I'm so confused, but then at some point I maybe stop caring at the same time. Dale Cooper goes up the stairs to the convenience store. Then there's some eerie electrical sounds and an effect, and the jumping man is seen coming down the stairs.
Yes.
What is the Jumping Man?
The Jumping Man is probably something foreboding being anticipated inside of it, noting that it is an ever-living presence.
It's going the opposite direction as him, so is it... What does that mean?
It means that right now there's things in play and movements happening that are notable and also outside of the goals of what Dale Cooper is. If we are especially to continue the reading, which I am, that Sarah Palmer is associated with the Jumping Man.
Okay, so Sarah Palmer, Jumping Man, and Judy, both similar.
Yes,
comparisons.
both similar in a vein of what is happening around.
And I think that there is very strong backing of it based on all the evidence I laid out earlier, and then also obviously the potential of it being Grace Zabriskie's face on the Jumping Man.
Mm-hmm.
However, all of these things are still walking on stilts. Because all you have to do is just kick down the stilt and say, oh yeah, that wasn't Grace Zabriskie's face. And immediately that Jumping Man connection goes pretty far away. Because that's the main proof. That's the main thing.
It's the main thing. It's the main proof. So in the meantime, whether or not it is directly inside of it, I'm taking it as something's moving against Dale Cooper in the background, almost in those seems of panic.
I just hate how flimsy this is. I hate how we have to read into these really fleeting blink and you miss it moments. If I hadn't gone through and told you and showed you and paused, would you have ever thought, oh, the Jumping Man right there had... No,
I don't think so.
A lot of people don't think that because it happens so fast. And it's would David Lynch put something important like that in that kind of way? I personally hope not, because I think it's not very good storytelling.
And meanwhile, I think that's very fun, at the very least, as an interactive puzzle, because without these conversations or these observations, I wouldn't be able to keep kind of growing in my mindset of okay, does this fit here? Well, does it? Am I reaching too far? Am I stretching to make sure that this ropes through? Right now, so far, I don't think so. I'm feeling all the more comfortable with not only my position, but also the fun and the chase of the puzzle.
So Dale Cooper talks to Philip Jeffries, who I think at this point we could say is not the tea kettle or whatever that is. He's inside of it. Because he says, it's slippery in here. That's a terrible impersonation. But he says it's slippery in there. So he's inside there. He's just kind of in there, which reminds me of the man in Eraserhead with the levers. He's just in this cramped space. I don't know what his body looks like anymore, but...
Elsewise, it is pretty, damp outside.
Okay, so you think he still might be the tea kettle?
It still might be the tea kettle.
What do you prefer to think?
I think I prefer tea kettle. Mostly because having something so drastic of a shift change and the sound style of it, recognizing how far this place can go, I like testing the boundaries and limits of the imagination on whether or not it would work through. I even kind of like the interpretations of whether or not hearing you like it or not, because at that point, it is a litmus test, I suppose, on how acidic or base this cleaning water is to make sure that everything is nice and tidy.
This is not based, by my opinions. That is a slang term in 5 years. People are going to be like, what's based? I feel like it's going to age, but it hasn't aged out yet, so I'm going to still use it.
We're young.
We're young. We're not young. We're getting old. Anyway, so he talks about where to find Judy, and he seems kind of confused like he was before, to be honest. But out of the steam, he creates the owl cave symbol, which then turns into 2 diamonds. They separate, and then it becomes an 8. And there's around the 8 this little not really around. It's on the 8 track music.
Mm-hmm.
The 8 track. There's a little orb that kind of moves up and down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So some ideas we can maybe talk about with that. The idea of the 8. Obviously, there's numbers. I don't know the numerology side. Maybe David Lynch means something by the number 8 specifically. I think of more that the number 8 looks like an infinity symbol.
Yeah.
So there's a time loop. There's an infinite element here. You could also assume it 2 rings. The main ring is the jade ring. We also have Cooper's ring. But with this ring, Ivy wed, it's the idea of marriage. It's the side of these 2 things that are connected. You could maybe do an Ouroboros type of idea here. I also think...
Ouroboros!
2 rings... We have to get back to Tiger and Bunny sometime. 2 rings could also be the idea of 2 timelines intersecting. The original and then... the new one, the one where Laura dies and the one where Laura lives. Mm-hmm. It could be the official version and the unofficial version, because apparently, say hello to Gordon if you see him, he'll remember the unofficial version, which that to me indicates the idea that Gordon is going to remember the version where Laura Palmer died, he's going to be like one of the few people or the only people to remember that version after Laura is taken out of that timeline. That'd be my guess. But I do want to note it says say hello to Gordon if you see him, not when you see him, which is a really foreboding wording. Like you may never see him again. And also, we don't see Gordon again.
We don't see Gordon again.
Trust the Gordon fisherman.
And if Gordon is a sort of like speaking point to David Lynch, like even like coming up to David Lynch and talked about it, it's unofficial because even then, like what is supposed to be trusted at this point?
Yeah. Also, you could take the rings to be not only like two timelines, but it could be two dreams that are intersecting and looping, that are irrevocably connected to each other. You cannot separate them. It also maybe is the visual of like a cell dividing, or maybe it's an atom bomb thing. It's the splitting of the atom. All of these things and more can be yours for the price of only $24.99. Send it to Dr. Amp right now. Send your money right now. Oh, also Palmer Household 708.
Yeah.
8.
The number 8.
Now, of all these different ones, do you have a certain leaning toward any of these interpretations or a different one?
At this point, it's one of those cases where the constant association and the many implications, you've went on to plenty to place onto the table. I think that if you ever walked up to David Lynch, you could say that any of those ones would work out. Because at the end of the day, I do think that there are reoccurring ideas that can come to it. Yeah,
there's no mutual exclusivity. It could mean all of them. It's also one of those cases where you just pick whichever ones you want.
Yeah. In this case, it's very notable for not only its curvature, but also the little ball moving from one side to another, almost like you are turning the crank on a trolley to change the tracks. Maybe something new has opened up. Maybe something has shifted enough that thanks to Philip Jeffries,
he swiped left.
He swiped left. He's like, yeah, no, you can go now, in that respect.
His last words to Dale Cooper are, Cooper, remember. What do you think Dale Cooper's supposed to remember?
I think it's one of those like little like pushes, little bits of edges that says that it's now up to Cooper's own mind to sort of like guide him. I think he's supposed to like take in what he once was, because there have been like a dynamic shift.
So remember who you are.
Remember who you are in that respect, because we are about to, in the following scene, when he's about to travel forward, do something very similar to the Tibetan stone method, in which he's going on towards emotions, feelings, and recognitions of his environment before trying to make an action that may seem like nonsense at first, but more so Cooper is guided by that spiritual sense.
Sure. So Dale Cooper goes back in time. Time travel is now in Twin Peaks officially. And this seems pretty on the face of it, that Dale Cooper went back to the time of Fire Walk With Me, the night that Laura would have been killed, and he tried to save Laura Palmer by taking her away from the situation. His wording here is that he was going to take her home. A very loaded terminology, as he took her presumably closer to the portal that would have been in the woods, presumably to that same Jackrabbit's Palace location, if we're going to go by what seems likely but not confirmed. Few things to note over here. One, I personally, amid a lot of things I don't like, I do love the way that her scream has been recontextualized, that in Fire Walk With Me, there's that part where she looks like past James and starts screaming, and in the original Fire Walk With Me, that did not get context. That was just a scream. I like that now it's the idea that Dale Cooper is in the woods and she saw Dale Cooper. I like it because you can simply say, no, she didn't, and sure. We don't know. She's on drugs right now. She just looked in a direction and screamed, but it happened to be in the direction that Dale Cooper was in. And if you want to interpret Dale Cooper as a negative evil force, I don't know, shady time-traveling man in the woods that she appeared in a nightmare dream one time might be a great fuel for that fire. Again, things were a lot simpler before you came here, Mr. Dale Cooper. So, there's something to that. I like that recontextualization. I think it hits different when you rewatch Fire Walk With Me. I also want to note the use of the term home. So in the book Laura's Ghost, there is some writing happening there. I can't remember which author specifically said it, but I think a few iterated the similar idea that when you're dealing with a case of abuse, such as Laura Palmer, taking someone home is not a good thing. That is not a safe place. That is not a healthy place. Taking Laura home is not good. Not a good thing. And there's also this argument that Laura Palmer had agency in Fire Walk With Me that Dale Cooper is now taking away. So you could interpret Dale Cooper's intentions as being, I'm going to go save Laura Palmer, but that doesn't seem to be necessarily a good choice, and I think there's some evidence to support that it's not a good choice based on everything that happens afterward.
It's something that, as an argument in favor of Dale Cooper, I do agree. It's horrible for him to bring like Laura back in that context, in that area. Maybe inside of the more suburban area, there would be less excuse for Bob Leland to drag her away. Mm-hmm. Maybe it could have been something that, at the very least, she would be alive, or at the very least, not married to the Red Room by following out with these individuals that will eventually lead to her death, because this is the night of her,
And it
death.
also goes back to the fact that Dale Cooper in the dream, although it was his younger version, what is time anyway, he does tell Laura Palmer, don't take the ring.
Yes.
Laura takes the ring. And that's what gets into that speculation of what does that mean. She actively went against what Dale Cooper said. The interpretation I think you and I have been going with, or at least I know I have been going with, is that the ring marries you to the lodge in one extent, but it also is a situation where it seals your fate. And so by wearing the ring, Laura chose to die instead of becoming the vessel of Bob. That is my interpretation. So when Dale Cooper said, don't wear the ring, don't take the ring, he was trying to save Laura from dying. She chose to wear the ring anyway and died.
Don't die.
So that's
Don't
my question,
die.
just to double check. Are we on the same page that Dale Cooper telling her don't wear the ring, don't take the ring, was also him trying to save her from dying in the past in Fire Walk with Me?
Yes, and that's very important. Put a mega pin in that.
You're the one putting pins in now.
I'm putting pins in. I have
Enjoy it.
something I'm very excited to talk about. We're getting all the closer.
Very exciting. As I'm approaching like 2 hours of recorded audio. It's going to be a beefy episode.
The ending of The Return being a
Who
beefy
could have
episode. Who could have
foreseen?
foreseen this?
Who could have foreseen? We'll have an intermission for you folks, don't worry. So, we are back to the past, and then
Samurai
we
Jack.
flash forward, and there's this moment where we see the pilot scene, very beginning opening, with Josie doing the makeup and Pete going out fishing. But there's a bit of a difference this time, in the sense that the body that washed up on the beach goes away, and Pete gets to go fishing. I just want to say a very quick side note that I think is very humorous. In the subtitles for this, the way it was worded is that Josie's humming was ominous humming, which is funny because outside of the word whoosh, ominous is probably the next most commonly used word, and a lot of times ominous noises are like supernatural evil, so I'm glad that Josie's whistling has been recontextualized with the same level of strength and language that The Experiment, Mr. C, and all of the evils of Bob. Yeah, Josie whistling is probably up there. I just think that it becomes a catch-all word way too loosely in the subtitles. It's funny. Yes, it is ominous whistling, but it's not to the degree of other things that are being used with that word. We need other vocabulary here. We get cuts to Sarah Palmer wailing inside of her home, and this is where I think a lot of room for interpretation can come at, because she's trying to, attack or get at the photo of Laura Palmer in some fashion.
Striking at it.
Now, there's a few ways you can do this. If you want to take a very, humanizing and maybe sympathetic approach to Sarah Palmer, it is her trying to deal very, aggressively, maybe unhealthily, with regret and guilt. She is trying to tear away at the memory of what she feels, some sense of guilt over what happened to Laura. But the fact that it's put in conjunction with the events before and after it, I think lend as well to a potential other reading of it, if you're looking at Judy involved, that this is doing something.
This is doing something.
So,
this is something where she is acting against it on the image of Laura Palmer. Not just any image, not just any picture.
The picture. So, given that before we see Dale Cooper leading her away and we see the potential what if of the timeline where Laura Palmer doesn't die, then we get the striking at the image. The next thing we see is that scratching noise. Well, we hear it, really.
The electrical scratching noise that we recognize from things such as that little, mob zone sitting.
It's the listen to the sounds noise.
Yes.
And I would say your first interpretation of it being like scratching wood was very apt, because you brought up the idea of the scratching wood.
Yes.
Either way, that noise occurs, and then when Dale Cooper looks around, Laura's no longer there. She has been pulled away. We hear this horrifying scream, and it seems very reminiscent of what happened in the Red Room, where Laura was shunted off into the space cosmos. That seems to be there. Now, the question you can then form for yourself, as your own viewer, is the fact that Sarah Palmer striking at the picture correlated to what just happened, or is it something that is included not plot related? It doesn't cause an effect. She didn't do anything to Laura there. It's more Sarah Palmer dealing with grief in a separate but similar scene.
It's correlated.
I think it's
more than
I think
confident.
it's too closely sandwiched. to not like if it's not meant to be taken as cause and effect, it's a really big red herring again.
This cheese belongs with the lettuce because they're right next to each other.
You got to approach it at some point Occam's razor idea, right? That if it's really obvious, if it's really screaming at you, you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this indicates that Sarah Palmer, Judy, Jumping Man, whatever, all three of the above, is attacking, striking, doing something to the memory or image of Laura Palmer that has the effect of what happens to Laura there. Now, where I think it gets more confusing for myself is, did Dale Cooper taking her away from the scene necessitate this happening? Or, kind of like with the fireman where he interceded and moved Mr. C, did Judy intercede and move Laura? And what I mean by that is, if the striking of the photo hadn't happened, would Dale Cooper have succeeded in taking Laura Palmer to the portal and then take her out of the time? What would have happened?
Here's the thing that
we don't know.
We don't know, but I'm fairly confident in what my knowledge is. Because I know before we memed back and forth the importance of the ceiling fan and how I thought the importance was in the stairs.
Whoosh,
I think the
whoosh,
importance
whoosh,
is here in the
whoosh,
stairs too.
Wow.
Here,
We begin and we end the same on this note of bad opinions, Professor. I thought you grew. I thought you loved the fan now.
when you're moving up the stairs and trying to do something up the stairs and something is moving quickly down, it's almost as if either as a response for the starting of the actions or as a response of trying to do something. If you're running down the stairs and you're running off somewhere, what I interpret that as is that now something is acting in action, either as a response that Cooper is like getting closer and closer, or simply as a inevitability. Even if whatever Cooper's going to be doing up those stairs, if someone's running down the stairs to go to the breaker and pull down the switch, I think that's what's happening. I think that things are acting around Cooper as Cooper is trying to recover, try to help, and trying to Lancelot. So, in this respect, as Cooper is ascending and moving forward, right now, someone's moving down to the foundation, down the stairs, and things are starting to get rolling. In this case, Sarah Palmer's actions.
Professor, I think it's time we talk about Judy.
I'm gonna go crazy.
Let's talk about Judy.
I'm gonna go crazy at this because Zhao Day went from a full 180 inside my head. For one, it was like the sense of like, oh yeah, no, extremely negative force. Oh yeah, Zhao Day. Oh, now we have to keep it in that negative end. And I kind of like tossed it aside because I was too busy laughing because it was like actively being interpreted and speaking towards us. Zhao Day, with this new context, I find very chewable. I find it very chewable. And I think chewing is going to be the biggest thing I'm going to bring forward with this.
Chewbacca, go ahead and... That's the Chewbacca noise, right?
Yes. I made the parallel already, but for just a quick note. Means of like an extreme negative force that happens. I've compared that the Hiroshima bomb that drops down, that is something that has very negative emotional context. And there's also the idea of deep emotional negativity coming from Sarah Palmer after everything has happened to her. Now, Mr. C is searching for it. Mr. C, by extension, is Bob. What has Bob done in the past? Sought out pain and suffering because that is Garmonbozia. I'm going to be using a lot of Fire Walk With Me in this respect because I do find Fire Walk With Me to be the literal accommodation of Lil, the cipher, the thing that you look to, and you keep the pieces, and then you bring that over to the return to a point them kind of look at it, and I'm feeling positive emotions towards the idea of using this as a cipher. But continuing, Garmonbozia is not only a form of sustenance that we've seen from the arm, but it's also what I would argue is a form of currency, because Bob is paying back the arm by giving forward this currency.
That tracks, yeah.
The idea of Garmonbozia, pain and suffering, if you wanted a deep valve of pain and suffering, and if an entity is as powerful as the experiment to bring an extreme amount of negativity, that would be what I would call tempting for someone like Mr. C/Bob to try to approach. It is something that, as a form of currency, or as a form of maybe even one-upping the entity. The full reasoning is unaware, but at the very least, the motivation to seek out pain and suffering is something we've already seen contextually with Bob, and to say that he would go to the extreme end of that, I think is reasonable enough. So Bob seeking out this Garmonbozia is something that I can believe continues through
The
with Mr.
Garmonbozia
C.
being emitted out of Sarah Palmer?
Out of Sarah Palmer, which is what we discover, but at the end of the day is just the larger route that Mr. C/Bob is taking at this time without knowing it is Sarah Palmer. Because elsewise, he'd probably just skip right to the end. In this case, he's taking the very mythical steps of trying to find this Garmonbozia,
Okay.
which he's actively doing as he's moving around, but he's looking for the jackpot in this case.
The mother of all Garmonbozia.
The mother of all Garmonbozia, and ergo also kind of his mother, in a sense. So seeking out this Garmonbozia, he probably is enacting to either increase it, take it, and have it selfishly, Mr. C. However, also using the context of Fire Walk With Me, we're going to look at Cooper for a moment. So why would Cooper seek it out? I think it's in that Lancelot ideal of if there's a great negative force and you know of the great negative force going on, that you do understand more of Jaude and probably have heard a few things while being in the Red Room enough, that being that Lancelot self and trying to help out, he knows Laura Palmer is hurting. Cooper is Laura Palmer's guardian angel. The guardian angel imagery throughout Fire Walk With Me is seen time and time again. And the usage of it is seen time and time again. And when I first saw the last scene, that's very notable in Fire Walk With Me as she looks up at her guardian angel. At first I thought, like, Cooper was welcoming her in with a hand at the side just because he happens to be a resident. But no, from his actions and from literally being right there as we are seeing this guardian angel imagery, no, I think that actually correlates. I find Dale Cooper to be Laura Palmer's guardian angel in this case, her Lancelot. So knowing that there could be something that he can try to actively do to try to act as this guardian angel and try to help because he knows there's trouble in the world and he wants to help be that guardian angel, he's going to try to do it.
Was he aware of being her guardian angel before the ending of season 2? Like, are you assuming in the 25 years that have transpired in our timeline?
I don't know how aware he is.
Okay, because he said trying to be a good guardian angel.
He's trying to be a good guardian angel, but it can also be in the passive sense for, like, Dale Cooper being the ideal...
I'm just saying, is he conscious of it?
I don't know if he's conscious of it. I don't know that.
Do you think that this is also supported by My Life, My Tapes? Being that's the most direct Dale Cooper story we have.
think it's supported by the aspect of dualities, different forms, and ideas brought in more from the Return as well as Black and White Lodges of things going like through these darker forms and lighter forms. The good Cooper is inside the lodge. I think it is more handled by those main points of source material more than Cooper's origin story. Which
you don't think it contradicts, though?
I don't think it contradicts.
So, like, it can't... You wouldn't say you have to discount My Life, My Tapes.
I don't think you have to discount My Life, My Tapes. I think that this is, as I was mentioning about evolution before, if Mr. C is an evolution of a Dark Cooper existing for a while, the Cooper left alone to the devices known as the good being sorted through, this is his evolution of being that entity that is watchful, kind, and just trying to help out the world around him.
Okay.
So, and I think that also is contextualized thanks to the time in Vegas, in which everything that he does is in that positive affect, in which he's positively affecting everyone in his life and is not going into any negative whims at that time. So that's where I'm taking those positive ends and where I'm really putting Dale Cooper in the idea of being that guardian angel.
So I think I'm with you. I don't agree with it completely right now, but I understand the idea that Dale Cooper, consciously or unconsciously, is Laura's symbolic guardian angel.
Yes, and I think Lancelot Court, now that you told me about Lancelot, is fitting for him to drop in. But
was he assigned to be an angel by some entity, or how does he become that?
I think he becomes that from the idea that someone needs help.
Okay.
I think that when he knows and has the knowledge of it and needs to help someone, Dale Cooper has not acted in a way that he steps aside. He truly has grown to love Twin Peaks. And by extension, I think that Laura symbolizes Twin Peaks in multiple ways. In some ways, you could say if recognition we live inside a dream, there's two people that I can think of being the dreamer, and one of those is Laura Palmer. So being that guardian angel, recognizing the dreamer and seeing her, he is trying to act in a way that will aid her in her continued sweet dreams. Because at the end of the day, not only is it the reality for himself, this world, everyone around it, and by extension, himself, but also Dale Cooper is a person who helps, that will put aside even his own desires and whims in order to help out people such as Audrey, in that sort of like case of like sitting down with her and saying, let's get some burgers and some shakes.
Just to clarify, Dale Cooper then would be the hero, not because it's his own dream, but because Laura Palmer, as the dreamer, would want a hero like Dale Cooper.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, now just double checking, when you say Laura Palmer's the dreamer, is it a girl actually named Laura Palmer, or is Laura Palmer like a pseudonym she's going under?
Potentially
much
pseudonym.
like Carrie Page.
Potentially a
just to double check.
pseudonym if she is the only dreamer.
Are Carrie Page and Laura Palmer the same dreamer?
I think that may even go a step further, in which like they might be a sleeping person beyond. So I am unsure.
Okay.
But mostly because there's one person that I think might be more apt to be referred to as the dreamer.
Okay.
I think Laura Palmer is a response to the dreamer because the frog moth. I never really thought about this at first, but contextualizing it in the idea that the frog moth crawls into Sarah Palmer's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Frog of a plague, moth of a flame. That is what I wrote down. Frogs notable as things of plagues of deep darkness. Moths attracted to a means of light.
I've always thought Kermit was really bad vibes, kind of an ominous figure.
But not necessarily to the greatest end. And
I mean, to me, a rat is like a plague animal. Are frogs really that associated with plagues?
Yes, like literally the end of days, revelations. I believe that frogs are a use of symbology, or at the very least, what modern media has associated with the symbology of a sea of
Again,
frogs.
I think of locusts. I'm a little...
At this point, it's a different doom and gloom of a different entity.
Okay.
And all sorts of things could fit in it. But in this case, if you were to put two insects together, like locusts and moths, it'd be hard to tell. Having something as notable as a frog moth, I think it works well.
Okay.
But in this case, crawls into
we're presuming is Sarah
Palmer's mouth. I think that planted in is what's meant to facilitate as a seed to lead to the great Garmonbosia. Something that in which an entity had decided to latch on to this girl as like a radio is played off in the background to lead to a great harvest of Garmonbosia. So that in response to this horrific evil that is about to occur, and seeing as the fireman is notable to act against those great evils, in response sends Sarah Palmer into the world, probably the one light that can exist.
Laura.
Yes, Laura Palmer, thank you. Into it. So kind of like in that like horrible, horrifying negative context of the dark egg versus the light ball, which could be referred to as a light egg, the sort of, again, yin and yang areas of that.
So Sarah Palmer is like Job if the god and devil both decided they're just going to lap up some pain and suffering?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, in this case, with that being said, with all the misfortunes Sarah Palmer is met with, I think it fits, but it also puts into the argument with the sleeping girl taking in the frog moth. Whether it is Sarah Palmer or a girl of a different name, could the girl, and by extension Sarah Palmer, be the dreamer? It's something where if that idealized end of the dream, everything turns into a nightmare.
Man, the Dick, Andy, Lucy storyline was a weird part of that dream. I'm going to tell you what. I don't know where that was coming from.
It's something that makes up for the world that is meant to be peaceful, and what Sarah Palmer has to recognize as she sits around miserably smoking her cigarettes. Something that, like, there's beautiful things going outside of her own personal horizons as she is stuck inside of this place where she's trying to make the most out of things as she's constantly drugged by husband.
So double checking if we go by... So that's your number one guess.
My number one guess is
Sarah Palmer.
Sarah Palmer or the girl, and Sarah Palmer is just what the girl dreams of herself as.
Okay, so my question is, like, how do we have any idea of what she's like outside of the dream to make any of these assessments or, like, assumptions?
What is she like outside of the dream?
Like, how do we know that she's like Sarah Palmer smoking away her days if that's in the dream itself?
I'm using it as the idea if this girl is Sarah Palmer more than anything. I'm using timelines as well as the mythic senses of someone dreaming using the closed eyes physically.
Maybe a closer question is everything the dream?
Is everything the dream? Yes. I think the girl standing and kissing the boy in this very close shot, and she goes to bed as a lullaby is sung. As this creature is introduced into her mouth, as her eyes are closed and everyone is put to sleep.
Okay.
In response of it, that's when the dream begins. Everyone is put to rest thanks to these entities.
So you have nothing outside the dream, though, as a junctioning point or as a center point for this theory. You only have things within the dream to interpret the dream itself.
I only have the things that happened at the end of part 8 to assess that it feels this is where the dream begins, thanks to sleep and slumber literally being interpreted using the odds and ends of these two entities, in this case, great darkness,
this is where
great
I
light.
struggle, because I could see reasons why Sarah Palmer would want to escape into a dream based on everything we know about her life in the dream narrative.
Yes.
I just don't know what your evidence would be if you only have the dream to go by. How do you prove the reality outside the dream with only the dream? It's like trying to prove the supernatural with only the natural.
I think that...
Ye of little faith.
I think it's that point where I have to look into those dual lenses and see the literal as well as the metaphorical as somewhat the same sight. Because, thanks to the contents of Part 18, how layered the dreams are or how far these entities go remains in this deep unknown. It is something where... Say, for example, the introduction of the Tremonts and the Chalfonts, which I believe are also very notable, and Laura Palmer's scream, or in this case, Carrie Page's scream, going out and causing reactions in a realm that seems less saturated in that soap opera-y, Twin Peaksian, or anything in Part 17. It seems less alive in this world than ever before when we're introduced to this layer above that Cooper travels to.
Okay.
So... it's something where the existence of Chalfonts and Tremonts in a place sitting around where once people used to reside, that apparently darker things happened, which I remember in the old RV park, when I remember the next door neighbors switching out for when they were visiting the neighbors of Harold. It's where these
Are they RVs or trailers? Are they the same thing?
I
know what you... The Fat
I know
Trout.
what you mean.
Fat Trout trailer
Fat
park.
Trout Trail Park. Either way, they are these layered entities that keep reappearing around points of misfortune and likely a harvest of this Garmonbosia, especially seeing the young Tremont boy hold on to cream corn physically.
He doesn't like it, though.
He doesn't like it, though.
He specifically asked for there not to be any cream corn. In fact, actually, Donna gets yelled at a bit by the Tremonts for having it.
But still follows along with it each time.
No. I'm gonna challenge you here a little bit. If the Chalfonts and Tremonts want pain and suffering, why would they react so strongly against having cream corn on their plate?
Is it both of the entities, both the Tremont boy as well as the grandmother? Or do they
From what
both?
I remember, it's the grandmother does all the speaking. I don't think the boy says anything.
Yeah.
He just teleports it away, and the grandmother explains he's a magician, blah, blah, blah. But the grandmother says we specifically asked for no cream corn.
Yes.
It seemed pretty declarative.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just simply entities that are watching over that are unassociated with, or something in which you can separate certain entities in the Red Room, but it still is an association with cream corn that they happen to follow along with it. Not wanting it, but they're always around it.
Are they? Were they living right next door to Laura Palmer when she was being abused by her father?
At this point, they lived inside the household afterwards, in which it's after the result that we see these falsehoods or the places completely disappear, including Teresa Banks when it disappears, because they're not there whatsoever after Teresa Banks is gone. But it's notable that they used to live there nonetheless.
Sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were drawn to her pain and suffering, more that they were just in the location due to other supernatural elements that were there. We don't know their motives by the end of the day. You could argue that the grandson has a different motive than the grandmother. Maybe he wants the cream corn and she doesn't, but that doesn't necessarily assert anything about the ending of Part 18 because it's the Tremont Chalfont name in general with a Mrs. attached.
But they just so happen to be around places where pain and suffering and cream corn happens to be. I still think that even though they may not like it, they still can be associated with locations of it.
The first situation that happened was there by Harold. Do you think Harold is as great of a source of pain and suffering as other people in Twin Peaks? Not really. Maybe. I think it's one of the lower ones. No, I'm going to poke holes in this a little bit, because if your main thing is that they live near sources of Garmonbosia, you've got one instance with Teresa Banks that, yes, you're right.
Yes.
But when we first see them in Season 2, if we're going to say this is consistent throughout the series, they're living in the area near Harold. They were just on the list that Laura would visit. but it doesn't seem like they were especially close to Laura's house or especially close to Laura herself. They weren't close to other people who were suffering. I would want to be near Benjamin Horne. I would be wanting to be near the Renaults. I'd be wanting to be near a lot of people who are going through much more suffering than Harold. Don't get me wrong, Harold's got struggles. Harold's got difficult things. Maybe the general neighborhood's got things. But I just don't think there's enough evidence to say that they were going for Garmonbozia in season 2.
Well, we can associate, which I have compared them to owls in the past before, that Harold has been watched over by entities and has also passed out from a result, has been kept basically captive by what seems to be these mystical forces and been stuck for so long. It is something in which if you are caught to a point that there's only one positive in your life and when that she has to be constantly absent, we've only seen scenes where she has been around, and after she dies and after even like any other alternatives are broken, Harold ends up on a noose with everything broken around him.
I'll play into your hand a little bit and give you potentially an argument I could use for you. Is that even though Harold himself may not be the source of all the Garmonbozia, this is one of the places that Laura visits the most is Harold's place. It's the place where Laura confides maybe more than anywhere else, other than maybe Jacoby's.
Yes.
And this is where the diary is located. Mm-hmm. And it's also the place in which we see the Bob form of Laura appear. Mm-hmm. So if you want to do some argument for that, maybe that's an argument in favor of it. Mm-hmm. I'm still not convinced, but I think that maybe there's some circumstantial elements with Laura visiting Harold that it is still in the trajectory.
Yes, which, going back to say, at the end of the day, Chalfonts and Tremonts being inside of places that tend to follow misery, but also replace those either places or nearby places where they just so happen to be. By name-dropping those, the foundation of this being a complete reality breaks down. Where if someone makes the argument of saying, like, it is no longer inside the dream completely, that's the one of the more suspicious points, followed up with also the scream from Laura.
Another piece of evidence, I would argue that it is still within the dream world, is that when they go to the town of Twin Peaks, they aren't suddenly finding out there's no such thing as a town of Twin Peaks. And alongside that note, when they do drive, it says the double R at the diner.
Yes.
If this was meant to be interpreted as the real world, would it still be the double R diner? It would no, because the real life Tweed's Cafe does not say double R on it. I want to note, though, this is where I think it's not 100% perfect. If you look at the street signs in the dark, it still does say North Bend Way. I don't know if North Bend Way exists in the town of Twin Peaks, or if it exists, I don't know, in the real town of North Bend.
And that's fair, whether or not it is the real world in the text of the fiction, or if it is the real world associated with our world being the real world.
I would just say there's evidence to support that Part 18's world, despite all of the weird stuff, is still part of the Twin Peaks reality on some level because it's the double R.
Yes.
If it wasn't the double R, if it was just Tweed's Cafe, no double R included, then I'd be like, okay, that's evidence something's different. It's the fact that that was kept. I think that's a really, because we don't visit a lot of places when Dale Cooper or Richard, whatever you want to say, goes with Carrie. Mm-hmm. One of the few things we pass by, though, is the double R.
It is.
So I think that that's evidence to the, a certain angle.
I understand where the evidence can come from, and I'll see the arguments. I think that the ending points are probably the most combative evidence.
But you're still in agreement with me, though, that this is not the real world.
This is not the real world. I do agree. I think that at the end of the day, Cooper is brought into a world that happens to have the last remnant of Laura Palmer. I think everything that's happening with Laura Palmer up to the end, the quickly moving entity going down the stairs, quickly probably trying to either A, enact the final phase of the plan, or B, try to outbeat Cooper for what's about to happen.
Yeah.
I think that this is where the Garmonbozia is being consumed. I think that this is where the currency is fully being cashed in. Okay. I think that this is a point where, since Laura Palmer is disappearing and Cooper is acting as a guardian angel trying to save her in multiple instances, not only in the Red Room is she now gone and absent, in which that's more so in that realm of Twin Peaks. Not only in the past is he able to not try to capture Laura and bring him about, but the last remnant of Laura Palmer being out there, Carrie Page, notably, we were missing a page from the diary, even after all diary pages have gone through. Carrie Page, Page,
Carries it,
absolutely. He gets to Carrie Page and as a last-ditch effort tries to bring Laura Palmer back in and is convinced, is like trying to push and present it and is able to try to transport her there, brings her all the way there. I think he's doing everything in his power to get Laura Palmer back while everything is acting against to cash it out. And I think, if I will, for the ending, where they are no longer there, where there seems to be new people, and he brought literally the last piece to literally scream off into the distance. I think this ending symbolizes the desire for a Lancelot ideal, the desire to try to fix things, the desire to stop a horrible outcome, leading to inevitability, not only of Laura Palmer disappearing and everything, quote-unquote, Twin Peaksian, or this end of this Garmonbosia being consumed, but literally Dale Cooper delivers the last piece on a silver platter straight to where the entity is residing, unbeknownst to him, because I don't think that he I think he thinks he's putting a bandage, or he's trying to go through the healing act of reintroducing something that was beautiful and try to bring Laura Palmer back to something of a home, being overlooked of this idea of being that thing that has to fix things, and instead does the worst possible outcome, bringing her back to a place of pain, and ergo leading Laura Palmer to a final death where every piece of her is consumed.
So I have a lot of things and a lot of questions. But I want to preface this first with a quote. So Mark Frost, he did an interview with Salon, and he was asked about the meaning of this episode. And of course, David Lynch would have probably just said, he would have given nothing, right? Mark Frost gave something. And whether he should have, whether he shouldn't have, what you think of it, what you don't think of it, up to your opinion. You've said Death of the Author for so long.
Hi.
Do you care what Mark Frost said?
I care as a means of insight, but I do feel very well inside my rating nonetheless.
If he says something that confirms what you're saying, how much more confident would you be?
I don't know.
Flip side, if he says something that disproves what you're saying, would it destroy your theory?
Maybe. It might destroy my theory completely for the greater odds and ends of the audience, or those beliefs may be something in which I'll be able to interpret enough as that Death of the Author. But as far as the text of Fire Walk with Me is concerned, as well as the ending to this, I feel fairly confident in this reading.
Okay. So I'm just going to read this, and I give this emphasis just to get your mindset before you hear it, just to kind of know where you're coming from, and that I don't know how many times either of the creators have talked about the ending. This is one of the only ones I'm aware of. So, quote, "The actions that Cooper takes have consequences, and they're unforeseen and unanticipated, and they open the door to all other sorts of strange and perhaps enigmatic things taking place." End quote. That's it.
Cooper does consequential actions that he may not be aware of, and it can lead into mysteries. I think I can agree
I don't
with
think
that.
it goes against your view at all. I will say this is a good juncture to point out a different interpretation of the ending that I think you and I are both disagreeing with. There are some people who interpret the ending as a happy one. There are people who interpret the ending as either happy fully or bittersweet, but there is a positive element to it, a victory to it. And again, I am not of this opinion. I don't think I'm the best spokesperson for it, but I will try to articulate my understanding of that viewpoint. So that would be, I believe, the idea that Dale Cooper, alongside Philip Jeffries, the fireman, and Major Briggs, to some degree of collaboration, were trying to take Judy down, Bob down, by association, Mr. C, and perhaps Sarah Palmer, all these negative forces. And their plan, to, chess battle, if you want to think of it that way, was to result in the defeat of those entities. Well, it seems like Mr. C got defeated by this. It seems like Bob got defeated by this through Freddy. That's 2 so far. And if we look at the potential ending then with Judy and Sarah Palmer, there's that image then of Sarah Palmer attacking the photograph. You could argue that that is, Sarah Palmer in some way cursing the situation or lashing out or attacking, but you could also see this is the throes of someone in defeat. That she is agonized over her loss, that she's like, dang it, I was like, oh God, I want to get at this, but I can't. She literally is powerless to do anything about it. She's already lost the game.
She's in
and
a
at the
breaking
end,
point.
when Sarah Palmer shouts out Laura, the result is the lights go out. And that could be a sign that lights are out for Judy, lights are out for Sarah Palmer. She has been defeated. Now, there's probably a lot more nuance that other people can bring to the table if they are adherents to this theory. I don't think it's the majority. It could be wrong. But I think there are some people who do read the ending as a win. That Dale Cooper and the firemen and company, they ultimately did it. They saved Laura Palmer, and they defeated the evil. I don't believe this because everything about the mood and tone to me of Part 18 screams that this is bad. And those final moments are so eerie and unsettling and uncomfortable from the music, from the performances, from the lingering shot with the credits. even from the sense that the Lynch Frost Productions logo at the end is silent.
Yeah, which it has not been up to this point.
It's always been loud electricity. That, to me, is ominous.
Lights have gone out, like literally as a circuit breaker. The lights are done.
And electricity can sometimes be a negative force, but as Hawk is very clear to say, it's just power. It could be good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that everything is drained, all of the energy is gone, and we're left with like the lingering image of Dale Cooper's confused, potentially horrified face at whatever Laura whispered. Excuse me? That doesn't seem good to me. I just want to, highlight the idea, though, that even with this ending, there are people who see it as a victory.
Mm-hmm.
They do see it as a positive thing. Do you think your theories can work with a victory, or are you pretty much saying, like, you can't believe in the victory idea?
Seeing as I feel that the Garmonbozia was fully accepted, unless, like, you really don't like Laura Palmer, I don't see it as...
You did, at first, early into our podcast, think she was an Eldritch Horror, so...
No, instead, I now believe in the larger Eldritch Horror that lurks around her more than anything. I believe more in the experiment.
One theory I remember seeing, and I can't remember if it was in like a Reddit post or if it was in Laura's Ghost, was that idea that what Laura whispered to Cooper in the original series was, "My father killed me," whereas in the return, it's "You killed me." Do you like that idea or no?
I think that it is something that if we are to look into Dale Cooper's face and in a sense of judgment on someone who just tried to help, but to the worst avail, in which Laura Palmer has met with the final death, I do think that that is, at the very least, interesting and compelling. And I do think that, as far as you can see from my reasoning on why that would bode well for what I already view as the ending.
Okay.
It's not to say that it is the case.
So just to get a sense of, like, what's the point of this? Like, let's say your theory is right. Let's say your interpretation's right. My understanding of what you're saying is that the frog moth entering the girl is the seed for the Garmonbozia that would later flourish more in the return with Sarah Palmer's own suffering and the malaise that she's in, but then ultimately, like a moth drawn to the flame, the real piece de resistance is that Dale Cooper is going to serve on a silver platter the ending of Laura Palmer, the final death,
yes,
by bringing her to this place of torture and trauma, and that when the lights go out, that is the entity of the experiment or Judy feasting on that darkness, feasting on that evil that was in the home of Alice Tremond unseen.
Notably, the scope of the camera lens is focusing upstairs, notably where Laura's room was.
Okay, so that's your interpretation.
Yes.
Am I correct? Okay, my question is, so what?
It's something that makes it known that despite the actions that go through, I have some might call it cruel, but an absolute fascination with bad endings. Where, not like bad, because I think that this is a pretty solid ending, but bad in the respects that it can be too late. The hero does not make it to the goal, or even the hero's attempts towards the goals end up leading to horrible outcomes. I think having media that is willing to have those points and explore those points not only are a rarity, but I find to value more if it is done in a respect that I can chew on, see, and am able to read and interpret. And from my exhaustive amounts of sort of like connection building with a lot of things like Fire Walk With Me, I do think that this is a good example of the ending coming through, that this dream has ended, but in the worst way.
Let's say that's all true. Again, what was the point then in all of Twin Peaks for the things that don't involve Laura and Sarah Palmer and Dale Cooper? Like, what do you do with plot lines? I made the joke earlier about if she's the dreamer, what's going on with Dick Tremaine? But in all actuality, what does that have to do with anything? Either the offbeat plots in season 2 or in the return plot threads that don't have to do with this main plot. Like, what's Dougie's deal with that? What are the meanings and importances of these dreams that don't seem directly relevant to the Garmonbozia seed plot?
I think the biggest part through Twin Peaks is that there's all sorts of external affairs while Laura Palmer's image constantly flashes up. And many lives are impacted by Laura Palmer. It's where the lives and existences of other individuals that, as far as their reality is concerned for the dream, things many times over seem to come out to the positive. Things seem to look up. Things seem to be great. Whilst in the background, Sarah Palmer constantly loses. There are events that go through where the world is wonderful, or the world can be overcome, or there is a villain that you can defeat in the background. Meanwhile, Sarah Palmer still suffers, to the point that things become too far too late, where the only associated person that she was even close to at one point was Dr. Jacoby, and I mean close as in the literal vicinity of him. And when Hawk tries to reach out, it is where I think that she is too far gone, that she's not going to accept help, because what's the point now? She is literally sitting in the home of ultimate suffering.
I think that this theory that you're proposing, a lot of the ideas I haven't heard as much about. They are relatively new to me. I don't hear a lot of people saying Sarah Palmer is the dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of your ideas, they have logic to them, they fit. I want to say that while I think that is interesting in that sense, I'm going to offer the counterpoint in the sense of, I feel that a lot of times in The Return, instead of telling a deeply meaningful or compelling story about people, instead, David Lynch and Mark Frost chose to make a story about time travel, multiple dimensions, aliens, and all of these things that lead to this world that barely even is coherent, barely even makes any sense, barely even matters. And I'm looking at it and it's like, yeah, you can do all these things to represent the ultimate suffering and make it creamed corn and all that stuff. But what happened to it being a story about real people? And I'm not against meta stories. There are series that you and I both know where I like when things get meta and things start to push the boundaries. But I think with Twin Peaks in this particular case, in this particular execution, I find that if we take this Judy narrative and you take the Dreamer narrative, I look at all of this and I'm like, so wait, all the stuff in The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer? What is that? That's a fragment of a dream of a different person, of a nightmare. And I'm just like, I don't care. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. And it's, instead of talking about Sarah Palmer's trauma and suffering as a real person, what happens to a mother who blames herself for not only the death of her daughter, but what happened to her daughter before her death, what happened to her husband, all of that happening under her own roof. What happens to Sarah Palmer when she doesn't have a network? What happens when a town doesn't help people who've struggled and who've been victims? What do you do with that? And I'm like, whoa, that's a really interesting question. That's a really nuanced and interesting dynamic. I want to hear that story. I want to know what happens to Sarah Palmer. And the answer is she got a frog moth in her mouth and she turned into the demon, the evil, and she's the jumping man. And she's over here and she's smashing the photo and she's messing with the timelines. And I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's not your fault. I'm not mad at you, Professor.
I understand.
But this is how I feel when I hear this. It's like, maybe that is the case. Why? Why is that the story that was chosen to be told instead of something about emotions and people? It's this, it becomes so supernatural that it passes the threshold. The original show for me, and even Fire Walk with Me, I think always had the supernatural in a way that enhanced the real. And now I look at it and it's like you turned Sarah Palmer into a monster. Okay.
I take Sarah Palmer in the respects of Frankenstein's monster, where it's more so in not the respect of a monster that comes out of nothingness, or the monster that is meant to be like this arcing like evil that must be defeated, but more so something that was created by external affairs outside of her own control, and something that she has to live with to the point of a deep misery and melancholy, almost. And that's the way I do view Sarah Palmer. I think the actions, or the most notably inactions, of a town in which she is the only one that doesn't get a sense of resolution or a sense of aid, and when it's too late, there's nothing to really get to her, I think is compelling from what I'm reading from the narrative. Not to mention the characters that are around.
I was quickly throwing that Audrey also didn't get resolution.
Audrey didn't get resolution. She is stuck inside of her own mind, either in a coma or not inside of a coma.
I think any theory about Twin Peaks: The Return has to account for Audrey.
Absolutely.
That's an anomaly.
Absolutely. Audrey is a strange anomaly, but I think that Audrey is used as an entity to show the flippant boundaries of the dream and how really deep that goes.
Just to quote you exactly what you just said, Audrey is used
Yes.
to show this.
Yes.
That's my problem.
No, I understand.
That is my problem.
And I will get to the problem, I promise.
It's that she becomes a plot device rather than a person.
Maybe it's from my own mindset that looks into fictions as a form of a dream, as a form of something of a reality that is formed by the sense of imagination that things are already in their falsehoods. But what matters and I think following Cooper so much inside of The Return shows that everything is real in the dream for everyone within the dream. These people are no less false than any other points of fiction because their world, as far as they are concerned, are as real to them as anything else. So that's where I find it more so of a venue more than anything. But by that extension, I will also invite that The Return is so far different from the original Twin Peaks, mostly because the original Twin Peaks was a soap opera-based story based on those characters, and Twin Peaks The Return is an exploration of the dynamics and the things that are at play that is simply a puzzle box, or boss, if you want to put it in some context.
Bob is the final boss, yeah.
It's a puzzle for you to put together, for you to weave and come, I believe, to your own personal conclusions. It's an interactive point of media where, yes, one can consider a point of heavy lifting, but some of those weights will become more easier to some than others, and some will be simply frustrated. I know I've never solved a Rubik's Cube, but I could probably learn how to do it, but those puzzles frustrate me, and I put them aside. This one doesn't.
If I haven't made it clear before, and maybe I said something different in the previous podcast, but at least in this moment right now, I am on team We Are the Dreamer does not mean that there is a one person dreaming the whole story.
Yes.
I am on the team that it is more the idea that the world we live in is imaginary, is fictional. It could be a meta commentary that they are living in the show Twin Peaks, but I don't think there actually is a dreamer personally. I don't think that there is a specific character that it's meant to be their dream. The closest I would say, if I had to pick someone, it is David Lynch and Mark Frost's dream that we are participating in, or it's the audience's dream that we are concocting Twin Peaks with the creators. Twin Peaks is the dream of our world, of real people making the world. It's Harley Payton's dream. It's Sabrina Sutherland's dream. It's all of our shared collective dream. But I don't think there's like, oh, this person? It's all their imagination. I don't think that's what's going on.
No, I think that there's an argument for the audience dream, or even by the context of like the type of media or the media that gets circulated, the American dream, where during the time and age of Twin Peaks of having something so like beautiful and something so like things are happening around here and things are up to the ante, but still the heroes are going to try to save the day with some weird things going on in the background and even like some corruption that leads things into nightmare's ends. I think that you could argue that into the original Twin Peaks. And by extension, what Twin Peaks The Return has to reflect then is not the sensibilities of the past dream, but more so the dream of the present, in which I think media has changed and evolved over time, in which we do have some of these more so darker storylines, and maybe there is something that tries to conflict and corrupt to the point that Twin Peaks just does no longer fits into and is recontextualized into the text. But still, I find that viewing to be something that doesn't fit fully to myself, though I do see a potential duality reading from it, simply because of the nightmare's end, if you will. What does it mean when the dream breaks or the dream ends, and what does that mean by extension what Laura Palmer is for the viewing audience, David Lynch or Mark Frost?
Said it at the very beginning of this podcast ages ago. For me, there's this idea that it's not inherently good to have a answer to a mystery. It's not inherently good to have a mystery that has no answer. It's whether the answer is sufficiently interesting or better than the mystery. Is it going to be quote-unquote worth it? When I think about season 2, David Lynch did not want to reveal the killer for Laura Palmer. I think that ended up that he was wrong, in the sense that regardless of what could have been if the answer hadn't been revealed, it's the revelation that Leland was the killer that gave us one of the best episodes of Twin Peaks, in my opinion. It gave us Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, which is one of my favorite pieces of Twin Peaks media, and it meant a lot to a lot of people. And it gave us Fire Walk with Me. And I think so much of my appreciation for Twin Peaks does settle around the idea that it was willing to be this story about Laura Palmer. And I think Laura Palmer's story is hard to tell with the mystery of her killer never being revealed. I think it completely changes everything. I think it was an answer that was good enough to be better than the mystery, personally. And the fact that the idea is that people dropped off after the mystery was solved, hot take, I don't think the reason people stopped watching Twin Peaks is because, I guess we know the killer, now we can stop watching. I think it's because the writers and showrunners did not give us something else immediately that everyone loved. Mm-hmm. I think it isn't the fault of the answer. I think it's the fault of the direction right away after the answer. That being said, I like season 2. That being said, it did work for me.
That being said, the timeline kept jumping all over the place, and you could almost argue there might have been a studio influence that may have been negative.
There just wasn't as clear of a focus or a drive the way that the Who Killed Laura Palmer mystery had been. There was nothing set up to supplant it, to go again. Now, could there have been? Yes, there could have been things. I think actually there's a lot of plot lines that aren't involving Laura's mystery that hooked me. For example, I haven't heard anyone ever say a negative thing about the Audrey plot line where she goes into One-Eyed Jack's and she's in danger. That is an interesting storyline. Almost everyone agrees it's interesting. And that's not Laura Palmer. That's not even Dale Cooper. There's a sense of Dale Cooper might be the one to save her or not. But you can tell great Twin Peaks stories that don't involve the killer of Laura Palmer. That's what was needed. And it just didn't happen the way that a lot of people wanted. That's not because, it's proof that the show got canceled because they revealed the killer. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think the revealing killer is one of the best things that ever happened to Twin Peaks. I say all of this to say that when it comes to mysteries and answers, it's got to be an answer that I find fulfilling, I find satisfying, I find enhances the work. And when it comes to Twin Peaks The Return, I'm in a tough spot. Because at gut level, I don't feel like there's an answer provided. I think David Lynch made a thing on purpose that you can't ever figure out fully because there's too many contradictions, there's too many weird things in the timeline, there's too many forces you can never quite figure out, so it's an endless puzzle on purpose. That's my current reading of it. I think any theory, even the best theory, even the theory you're putting forward, there's enough things that work outside of it where it's like, okay, cool, I hear what you're saying, okay, but what about this? What about that? And you could do this forever, and maybe that's the goal and something that people appreciate about it. I'm left uncertain, though, because I don't even have a compelling hook of a mystery. I don't have anything I'm that interested in The Return to really compel me that way. And then if we take the answers, let's say your theory's right. Or let's say other theories that Cooper's the dreamer or Audrey's the dreamer. It doesn't matter. Any of these answers, are they good? They don't do it for me. They don't really do it for me. All these things, it's got to be a worthwhile answer. And it reminds me of Citizen Kane, which I feel like the ultimate film bro here by saying that. But no joke, if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, I think it's actually a good movie. It's one of those things that gets overhyped because people,
I know.
People take it for granted it's a good movie, and it always annoys me when someone's like, obviously it's good. No. I actually think it's a pretty good movie.
I just want to say this is your least hottest take I've ever heard.
I'm not going to spoil the answer to this if you haven't seen the movie and don't know, but at the very beginning, the main character dies, the main focus character of the story. They're going to investigate for the rest of the movie. And the final word that he says before he dies is Rosebud. And part of the attention of the movie is going to be, what's Rosebud? Who's Rosebud? Is that a lover? Is it a place? What is it? And at the end, we get an answer. I'll say that. We get an answer.
It was David Lynch.
My point, though, is that very few people would look back and say, yeah, Citizen Kane could have been a really good movie. It's a shame that they had to give the answer of what Rosebud was. Very few people say that. You know one of the people who does, though? Orson Welles. In the sense that it's his least favorite thing about the movie. He dislikes that. Now, I haven't ever found anything saying he, didn't want to say anything, but I have found quotes where he basically says, yeah, it's tacky, it's the worst part of the movie. And I'm over here disagreeing. Because if you know what Rosebud is, what I would say is that it gives a lot of character development and depth to a character in an interesting way. I think it gives you a fuller picture of the character than if you didn't ever have an answer. My point, my TLDR of my long-winded rant is, I think if your answer really brings depth and nuance and all these things to dive into, it can be excellent to reveal an answer. Giving us a meaningless, endless series of mysteries that have no clear solution, that's all supposition, where the best we can do is interpret things with alternate realities and dream worlds, it just doesn't interest me. And that's where I struggle with Twin Peaks The Return, whereas a lot of other shows I could get into. It feels like even from the onset, its goals are adverse to me. As someone who loves to interpret Twin Peaks psychologically, as someone who loves to interpret Twin Peaks personally and internally. Rosebud. At this point, listener, you should take a stretch break. Stay hydrated. If you've been with us and you have been sitting immobile, just captivated in complete and total enrapturement of our thoughts, and you were working out and you stopped working out. You were going down a slide and you stopped going down the slide midway, and there's a line behind you wanting to go down the slide. You should finish your slide. You should just take a drink of water.
This shows two inevitable outcomes of the mind of whether or not it's a grown adult sitting on the slide waiting, or if it's for some reason this child has gotten the hand on an iPod or something and is listening in. It was a child. This is not the appropriate place to be.
It's a grown adult on a slide or a child doing a workout. You don't pigeonhole our listener. Although our podcast is not for children, but don't pigeonhole our listener. Point is, if you need to take a break, we're going to do a little bit of an intermission here. Thank you very much for following us so far. If you have any thoughts on anything we've talked about so far, you can email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com. Tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1. That's the numeral 1, as in one slide you're going down. Or you can comment on our YouTube upload of this very podcast. If you're not there, you can just hop, skip a doodle over there and type click, clack, moo a message for us. We are interested in receiving, potentially from you, some future fuel, if you will. You can energize us. You could be the Energizer battery in our hearts, the Energizer bunny battery in our hearts. Upcoming, at some point, we're going to do a look-back episode, probably on the return, special features of the return, as well as the final dossier. And we would love to hear your questions for us, or questions about the show in general, your theories on the return.
Your hot takes.
Or things we missed, like details that we haven't talked about yet that you think would be interesting. And again, you can email them, tweet them, or comment them in the YouTube. If you want to be anonymous, just don't say my name. Or if you want to have a certain name, say it. Cool. The more we can add to a discussion, the more that it goes beyond us, I think that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
That being said, now that you've stretched your limbs, you've finished your workout, you've gone down that slide, got some odds and ends to talk about here. Some last little things. So, there's one song featured here. It's Julie Cruz performing The World Spins. Interesting little note about this particular version is that the song we hear at the Roadhouse is only the second half. We don't hear the first half. When we go through the lyrics, I'm going to give you all of it because it's the whole song.
Yay.
And David Lynch wrote the lyrics for this. This is a song that obviously has connections and roots before the return.
Thanks, Dave.
In the original Twin Peaks. I'm going to start, though, with the stuff that is said in the version we get, and then we'll just add on the stuff that wasn't said.
Very well.
So, what we get is, Halley's comets come and gone. The things I touch are made of stone, falling through this night alone.
It seems like everything's going cold. It seems like the great events have passed. It seems like everything that you've waited and expected for is now gone.
Love, don't go away. Come back this way. Come back and stay forever and ever. The world spins.
What do you know? Another lyric about longing.
Now, notice this one ends with the world spins. The first verse ends with please stay. It's the world spins version that's been given, not the please stay version. Maybe you can read into that. Maybe you won't. You didn't say anything, so assume you're not going to.
The world spins. It's something that things will keep on moving and continuing, but making the world being the more context that is focused on in this case might be just recognizing that even the world will go on despite how cold it may feel.
Because when the song originally played in Twin Peaks, that was, I think, Donna and James are there, right? Am I mistaken in my memory here?
I think that
was Roadhouse, right?
Was it Roadhouse? I think it was Roadhouse. I'm trying to remember.
So anyway, that was after Laura Palmer died. And that's the main thing I think would be about the world continuing on after a horrible tragedy, a coldness. How do you interpret it now in regards to this? It was at the end of part 17.
I think the world continues on in its coldness, just desiring a sense of longing, if you will.
Okay.
In this case, the world being in the respects of a dreamer, wanting something more and warm and good to them. It's the context of this person who's now listening with a frog mouth inside their mouth, as opposed to the people that exist in the dream.
Hard to sing along with it when you have a frog mouth.
Go away.
So these are the lyrics that were not in the version in the return, but are in the original full-length version, and they're at the beginning. We skipped ahead to the end. Moving near the edge at night, dust is dancing in the space. A dog and bird are far away. The sun comes up and down each day. Light and shadow change the walls.
I think it's just acknowledging the environment and things that will be associated with positive things, while it's also acknowledging that there's going to be flashes and changes in the world around them.
Jerry Horn is a very strange entity in the return, and we get closure on Jerry's story in part 17. But it's something that, to me, feels completely out of... Like, it's not related to anything else happening. And if I were to try to argue that 17 and 18 are built on purpose, I look at the fact that Ben got the call about Jerry in part 17, and I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? Because the entire rest of the part all fits into the main storyline except for this. Why is it in part 17? I personally think there's no reason. I personally think this is just what happened. I think that's where they slotted it for the time.
I think that it's something to be tragic against Dick Horn in the respects that he, like Jerry, witnessed the grandson of Benjamin Horn, and by extension, his nephew, completely be murdered and completely be evaporated from the world, looked onto it, and instead was so over-encumbered by his own self, his own, like, decisions and choices, that all he can think of is he is the murderer. And that his binoculars... Actually, I don't even think he said that he killed him. He said his binoculars killed him. That he's, like, so disassociated that he's willing to believe that this item is the thing that killed him.
To be fair, in the world of Twin Peaks, that's always possible.
That's always...
Green gloves can shatter entities like Bob. So.
That's possible, but I do think it shows a bit of tragedy even further on Dick Horn's character, though, admittedly, he is, like, a darkest black on the actions that he's done. It still shows that even at the end of the day, his own family not only doesn't recognize him, but is so caught up with themselves that it's still overshadowed. I think the person matters in this case.
I think that's reading a lot into it. I think it's mostly for comedy, but I will say the main effect it gives for me is that it really puts the final nail in the coffin that time and space are basically meaningless in the return.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at what is going on, it makes no sense in the kind of way that has to be almost on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So Jerry is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And if we look at Twin Peaks being the location where North Bend is in our world, because that's obviously where a lot of the Twin Peaks sites are, if North Bend is Twin Peaks and you were to go and you were to measure out how many miles is it from North Bend in real life to Jackson Hole, Wyoming?
Which, mind you sent me this before, and
Yes.
this is just on the roads. He took a shortcut through the woods, but on the roads, if you were to take a path, still plenty of distance.
If you were just measuring miles, it is 847 miles away.
And I would walk 840 miles, so...
If you were driving, that would be a 12-and-a-half-hour drive. If you were walking, it's a little bit longer. So if you were walking, and let's say an average person walking like 15 to 20 minutes per 1 mile. So it takes you about 15 to 20 minutes to walk a mile, if that's your constant speed, times 847 miles, that is 211 to 282 hours of constant walking. So to give you context, if you were to not sleep, not rest, not have to ever detour from your path, you beeline it completely at a constant, unerring rate, it would take you about a week of walking without ever resting, sleeping, doing anything else.
Man, it's so unfortunate for Jerry Horn that the only snacks he carried on him was more mushrooms.
Now, Jerry, is obviously a man in great physical shape. You look at Jerry, and this is a man who could walk across the country.
Sure,
he is in his prime
cheese pig of a man.
He's in his prime health, completely. So, point is, this is obviously extreme. You don't just pick Jackson Hole, Wyoming, unless you want to make a point. Either for humor, because it's funny he got that far.
Yes.
Or the implications that there is no sense of time and distance. Because we see Jerry talk to Ben in the beginning of the return, right? Like part 1 or 2. Meaning that from the beginning of the return to the end of the return, however you want to measure Ben Horn's role in these events, somehow Jerry Horn managed to go 847 miles on foot that direction. At best, that'd be a week of constant walking, but that's obviously not happening. If he walked half the time, it's 2 weeks. I don't even think it took him longer than that if it was real, right? So how many weeks has it been since Ben has seen Jerry? Because here's the problem, right? I don't know about you, but if Ben is, a reformed guy and Jerry has family, if someone's been gone for more than 2 weeks, I would hope there's a search party. I would hope there's someone looking. I would hope your answer to the phone call wouldn't be, "Oh, Jerry, what's he doing? Did he commit any crimes?" It'd be like, "Oh my God, Jerry, is he all right?" I understand Ben is not the most emotional guy, but the reaction he gives sounds like someone who's been gone for a day. It doesn't sound like the reaction for someone who's been gone for a month.
Mind you, throughout this series of Twin Peaks, Jerry was the one who always traveled. He was known for a sense of travel where he would just go off to a distance for quite some time. To say that when their lives divulged, where Jerry's still okay with darker aspects, while Ben is sort of manning is let me focus on my work here. To say that Jerry would disappear for an amount of time is very, I would say, wouldn't be in the capacity that would be outside of Ben's belief. Now, I think the biggest importance that this does, and I'm just realizing it now, is to put a location to where Jerry is at, or at the extremity of the location, show it's even in a different state, to show it's not just across a little bit of a path. Because coordinates, we know the correct coordinates lead to Twin Peaks.
Yep.
However, the two coordinates that were false are all the way down here. It's to show, if I'm not mistaken, these are the same coordinates to Twin Peaks that it was Judy that gave forward, ergo confirming.
You mean Diane?
Diane, sorry.
You said Judy, so.
Sorry.
Different entity entirely.
Different entity entirely. But Diane is the one that gave the coordinates because those are the ones that match up to Twin Peaks and not in Wyoming.
So
yeah, I think that just answers the mystery, thanks to, by extension,
well,
Jerry
but
Horde.
then it opens up another can of worms, though, of time it takes to drive to places and travel. It's a 12-hour drive from Twin Peaks. I mean, it's possible. It's just kind of weird that, I guess you would have to say that if it was in Wyoming, Mr. C had the thing with Richard and then drove 12 hours to the town of Twin Peaks and nothing happened in between. Because, from watching it as a show, it's the next thing that happens with Mr. C. Yeah.
It's dark, and then it's light the next time. So
Okay.
say that, the night went into day, the darkness went into light, I can believe it. Not to mention that Mr. C testing out this, making sure, because the biggest flaw in his current logic that he needed to test out was because two of the coordinates that correlated were here.
I have a very important question. Probably the most important question we're going to ask in this entire episode.
Go for it.
Does Mr. C need to sleep? Because Mr. C doesn't need anything. He wants. Does he actually?
I like to think he does, but he sleeps with his eyes open because we saw him in a
Can
hotel
he drive
room.
while he's sleeping?
Maybe.
I'm actually.
He just goes off the road and
I'm
just
actually
keeps
kind
moving.
of being serious because, given he's not a natural human and he's not like a tulpa that thinks they're a human, I almost wonder: does this guy actually need to eat, sleep, poop, any of those sort of things? We see him at the diner. Does he eat his food?
I don't remember him eating his food. He might be chewing onto it, but there's also the question of, what does that even affect? We are in the realm of blending things together, that this man has had multiple other men dig into his organs to repair him.
I think if he's meant to not be a human at this point, I don't know if he needs to eat or sleep. I just think he can. I think it's optional. That'd be my headcanon, I guess. Again, I'm not really a huge fan of all of this because it's further getting into supernatural stuff that I'm not always a fan of. But I'm just thinking logistically, it's a lot easier to go on a 12-hour drive in the middle of the night if you don't need to sleep. Mm-hmm. If he didn't need to go to a hotel or anything, he could just literally keep driving forever. Mm-hmm. And given the amount of distances he has to traverse to get from place to place to place, it's possible. You also got to wonder about Dale Cooper's stamina for being able to drive from Odessa. Because I love when Carrie Page is like, is it a far away distance? It's literally as far as you can get on this continent.
Yeah, isn't it Odessa in Texas?
Yeah, Odessa, Texas to you got to go from Texas to the Pacific Northwest, complete opposite ends of the country. And it's it's long. It's a ways away.
They couldn't find an apartment in Florida to make it completely.
I don't know about you, but I could not just drive that going one way. Just go.
I don't recommend it. I have done something akin to that.
Okay.
I don't recommend it.
You may or may not be human. That's what you're trying to suggest here.
Crashed in the Mojave Desert.
Oh. That's a whole... If we did a Patreon, that'd be a Patreon exclusive. If you want to learn about the professor crashing in the Mojave Desert...
Just ask me.
I do want to ask, speaking of asking you things, Jerry, do you like Jerry better in the return of the original show?
Original show.
Okay.
And especially after the cook killed him.
Okay. Did you like this as a story for Jerry in the return?
It was one of those cases where...
You never really had anything to say about it. You kind of just looked at it yep. And then you just kind of moved on. It didn't sense any interest or attachment.
It's something that I don't have a larger compelling thing to give from. He's not a favorite character. He's not anything big. But every time I saw him, I kind of cocked my head and went, okay, Jerry, where are you going? How are your adventures today?
It was satisfying to you?
It's satisfying on the ends that I'm interpreting.
See, to me, it's one of those cases where I would look at it and it's if I was putting any stock in it, I would want it to quote unquote go somewhere. Him just being off screen, found naked in Wyoming, feels really anticlimactic if we expected Jerry to matter. But the thing is, I don't think you ever expected Jerry to matter, so I think you were fine.
Not to matter like he had to be a presence. I think he matters in a sense of background detail that continues the puzzle box thing.
He is used.
Yes. And I don't think that's necessarily fully bad.
Not
I see where it can be
necessarily.
seen as bad. I can see where the perception goes, and then Jerry is utterly revolting in the sense
He
of
just
like,
doesn't have a character. Like, again, it's like, to me, there's not even contest talking the original show versus this. Jerry's not one of my top, 30 Twin Peaks characters, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But he's at least got a personality. He's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Here, he's just off on weird adventures with his not foot. And I don't think it really goes anywhere that...
Jerry and the Knot Foot going on sweet adventures off onto the birdie boo.
So, the drunk. That's the last miscellaneous thing I have from part 17. You speculated before that he might be Billy.
He might be Billy or an analog for Billy. With this person with the open bleeding mouth and the sort of like being stuck inside of a cell, there is a concern of whether or not he should even be here in the first place.
Yeah, I guess I want to say, first of all, that if it is Billy, I don't think it changes anything. Like, let's say it is Billy.
Okay.
What does that do? Like, oh, cool, it's Billy. Does that change anything? Because, like, Audrey's story's already done, basically, by this point.
It puts up a potential foundation of if this is a Billy or analog for Billy on whether or not you believe any other foundation to be fully true.
Well, because we have someone shouting in the Twin Peaks diner, "Where's Billy?" That's the only indication we have for sure that the Audrey Roadhouse scenes about Billy have any connection to the rest of Twin Peaks.
And maybe this is where Billy continues to go on. And maybe this is where Billy continues to live wherever Audrey is not living.
I just have no interest in Billy as a concept. So to me, it's like, if it is him, okay. If it isn't him, okay. Like, I don't think it changes anything because I don't know who Billy is. I think it's an arbitrary, random thing to me.
Maybe he works at the same place as that one potential therapist or something
So
like that.
do you think
wherever.
it matters if it's Billy or not?
I don't think it matters that it's Billy other than adding those details together in the background of like stories happening in Twin Peaks.
I just want to know how much of our interpretation hinges on that is basically my point, you know? It seems like what he's representing and what he's doing in the scenes is more important than his name in this particular case. One idea I want to highlight here is from another fellow Twin Peaks podcaster. This is from Counter Esperanto Podcast at Winds of the Weird on Twitter. Quote, "The drunk is a troubling figure for a number of reasons. No way the Twin Peaks Sheriff Department would just let him bleed there. Is he even really present? This one glance," and they include a picture, "from Freddy is the only indication that anyone but Chad sees him." End quote. So you'd kind of wondered this too. Does anyone even see this character to know that they're even there, or is it just like a personal demon of Chad?
It could be a personal demon of Chad. It
I think
could be
Freddy
something
looking
that
at
Freddy
it
looking
is
there.
pretty clear.
Pretty clear that it's real, but I can see the arguments where like the mythical glove.
You could
hand
argue
man.
that Freddy is a gifted and damned character. He can see things that are not seen by other people. For me, it's one of those things that it's too flimsy because you have a look from Freddy but no vocal acknowledgement. And so we can't even 100% confirm, does he really even see this guy? And if he sees it, does he see the same kind of person? For all we know, it's just a regular dude to him.
Not to mention the person who said that the blood was dropping from his like mouth as a comparison point wasn't brought up as Audrey. It's just name association that we found out from people at the Roadhouse. So if we are to believe at that night those people at the Roadhouse will recognize the bleeding mouth of this man, and we see a bleeding mouth man inside a prison cell, it may very well be a case where he is real and he is in a very bad place and no one knows what to do with him.
But it leads with that situation where if he is really there, then the Twin Peaks Police Department put this man who is bleeding continuously in a jail cell without any medical attention.
It looks like he got stitched up on his face before he tears it apart. So,
but like, really, what do you do? Like, that's where I think if he's really there, it's pretty damning.
yeah.
And it feels like a commentary, but also nothing else substantiated. It's because we're given almost universally positive indications about Hawk, Andy, Frank Truman. Like, they're not portrayed as horrible people. Putting a bleeding man in his condition in a jail cell without medical attention seems really weird for them. I agree.
Which I think leads into the potential mythical end on whether or not he's not actually there and just an entity. To be, maybe he's not a woodsman, but we did see a mythical person sitting in an adjacent jail cell, sort of like sitting by as another person was suffering earlier in the text with Shaggy
But
Doo.
again, that is a woodsman. It's a very specific visual element. This guy doesn't
Exactly.
have that. To be honest, again, my cynical, maybe jaded view of things, I think David Lynch and Mark Frost put him there for mood. I think it's put there to mock Chad, and I think that it's something that was only meant to be that. I don't think it's meant to be supernatural. I don't think it's meant to be a commentary on the police. I think it wasn't fully thought through.
Fair.
I think it's just, we're going to put this guy here who's bleeding out the mouth, and it's going to annoy Chad. And maybe there's a grander reason than that. I just don't think there's enough proof for it. In Part 18, we've talked about, obviously, the ending, so I think most of that's already been addressed. There are a few other things. You mentioned earlier that they made a new Dougie Jones. Do you interpret this copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of whatever? Is this a happy ending? Because, like, they manufactured a new husband for Janie E and a new father for Sonny Jim. Is all good? No worries?
I think it's in a better result because the copy at first came from Mr. C, who already was doppelganger to Cooper, so copy of copy in this respect. To have it from what could be considered a quote-unquote original source maybe will cause less dilution and also probably more closer to what might be a Dale Cooper. So we get a little bit of like a joyous dialogue before he just simply says home. And
so,
it's
happy ending?
So I called a happy ending from the framing.
Okay. And how do you feel like when you're watching that ending? Do you feel emotionally like, oh, it's so sweet? Like,
No.
it's good. What do you feel?
I feel like, oh, they got a Dougie.
See, that's what I feel too. But you, for some reason, like that.
Yeah.
I feel to me like it's this hollow plot point. Like, it's, yep, it happened. Cool. We can wrap that one up.
I think it's one of those things in which, like, it's a sweetness of a candy. It's something that, for the most part, the taste is nice to me, but I'm not gaining anything from it. There's no, like, positive values to it. I'm not gaining any of my daily values from this candy.
Congratulations.
It's just a sweet pop.
That's such a great review of The Return. It gives me nothing I need. Wow, sounds wonderful. Love the aftertaste.
That's not a review for The Return. That's for certain instances such as this.
Such as a main component, Dougie, the plot line that took up a lot of The Return.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cooper and Diane drive, specifically 430 miles because 430 has to repeat. And, there's this whole thing about their destination won't be what he expects, but he's insistent, almost commanding Diane to kiss him, which is the first sign of several instances of him kind of ordering Diane. At first, you can maybe interpret it a little bit nicely, but I think by the time you get to the sex scene, it really gets recontextualized. I just want to note before we get to the motel that the power line structure that he is near when he is indicating that this is the place, other people have noted it. I'm a subscriber to this as well to some degree, that the power lines look like the Jowday symbol.
Oh.
Because you have the two little antennae things poking up at the top, and then it's kind of got like the diamondish shape.
Oh, no, that's cool.
I think it's a coincidence. I don't know if it's on purpose. I don't think it means a whole lot other than just electricity at base. But at this point, electricity at base is like an obvious thing.
Yeah.
Even to the point where Philip Gerard just says out of nowhere, electricity with Philip
Electricity.
Which, I don't know. To me, that felt a little bit like, okay, cool. Like, I don't really know what him saying it has to do with anything. Because by this point, yes. Yes, it is.
Yes, Philip Gerard, we know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just saying a word at that point to me, but maybe you could argue
Drink
that it...
your Ovaltine.
Maybe you could argue it ties into Hawks talking about the map, that the fire on the map represents kind of like modern-day electricity. So Philip Gerard saying it is supposed to indicate to the audience that this thing with Philip Jeffries is the thing on the map with the fire. I don't know if I want to run with that or not, but maybe...
As a reminder to Cooper to keep in mind for electricity because he's got all the keys that he needs at this point. But just as a reminder, and remember, electricity.
I think like one of the biggest arguments I would use against the happy ending interpretation of Part 18 is what happens at the motel. Because even before we get involved with Carrie Page, when it's clearly Dale Cooper, they go to the portal, things are not supposed to be the way they're going to be before, and it's suddenly night when they're driving. They go to this motel. First ominous thing, of course, they're driving at night all of a sudden. They're not talking to each other. It feels kind of eerie. But then while Cooper's inside getting the reservation at the motel, Diane's in the car and she sees herself there.
Not only sees herself, but she like walks around the corner, looks back at herself. I think it's one of those first indications where like Diane is realizing something important, either about herself or what she has to come to acknowledge.
I just think it's eerie. I don't know beyond that what it means or who is that other Diane.
There's two realities that I can think of. One is the reality, memory, or thought process that she is not the only one, whether she is the original recognizing her doppelgangers or whether she is a doppelganger acknowledging something that is another doppelganger original, something that could be very much complicated. But I think it is where Diane is coming to acknowledge something deeper about herself and her presence here.
What is the something?
that since the person walks around the corner and looks at her and stops, no approach or anything like that, it feels like a waiting. It feels like she is not meant to be there, that like something is expecting her to come back in this case. So it's almost as if her other self, her incomplete self, or the self that she has left behind is looking at her from behind the corner and is waiting for her.
All right. They go into the motel, and I want to give props to David Lynch here in that he managed to make the most uncomfortable and disturbing scene of all of The Return, possibly among the highest in Twin Peaks. There's a lot of things in Fire Walk With Me that are very disturbing, or Maddie's death, but definitely the most disturbing scene for me in The Return is a sex scene.
It is, because...
It's ostensibly a lovemaking scene between Dale Cooper and his true love. And
as an example towards, I would say, for David Lynch's ability to kind of juxtapose the positive effects versus extreme negatives.
I think this is a phenomenal scene.
Yeah, exactly. It's like where it's trying to like show off with this beautiful music that's going on that seems triumphant in a sense, that is met with a long silence in between, where the actor...
Well, not even silence. It's not silence, it's ambience. There's a droning.
There is a droning.
And that's important to me, I think.
It is very important. Diane ends up like through this as she continues to move across it. You see her look up, and the horrible sort of like twisting facial structure of it goes through when her hands wrap around the neck as well as covers the face before it's completely covered. Even when she's looking up far away and the hands are completely covered, she's trying to disassociate, or at the very least keep the face covered.
I'm 100% in your interpretation.
Cooper.
100% in your interpretation. Just want to add, though, that part of what makes this so good, though, is that there's that plausible deniability element where her facial expressions could be pained pleasure, right? That could be a form of sexual release.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean what we're interpreting it as.
It's not something that reads, and it's not something that seems to be in my reading.
There are more than one ways to interpret her agonized face.
Yes.
And I think that that's what really, really helps.
I think it really helps. And
but
I think
the return of My Prayer, of all songs, the song that played when the woodsman was, doing his thing. Right?
Yeah, actually.
You didn't catch.
I didn't catch that.
Oh no, it's literally My Prayer. It's the song that plays over in part 8.
As they're
That's
tucked away into bed.
That's
a huge thing right before their rest.
Yeah. So that's an ominous thing. But even again, before the sex scene, it's that ordering mentality where Diane's like, well, what happens now? And Cooper's like, you come over to me. It's like a command. It's not affectionate. It's not romantic. It's not anything.
It's something that can be read as affectionate in a style of being like, I finally have you here. The tone, though, is buried in neutrality.
And then again, during the sex scene, even before she covers his face is unreacting. His face is null. And this is where we both have expressed feelings on the Dougie scene, the sex scene with Janie E. But I think that this does a long ways to justify or retroactively add a lot of context to the Doug E. Janie E. lovemaking scene.
Especially since, and maybe it's just because it's easy for the framing, it is the same sexual position, it is the same stance, except where there is a lightness, where there is humor, where there is something that is very light. This is heavy.
And if there was, again, ever anything that I want to say is like on purpose, that comparison's on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you said, even down to the position.
Down to the fact that they're literally like distant sisters.
And in both shots, we get shots of Cooper's face.
Yes.
But with Dougie, it's this like bewildered joy.
And this one, it is
stone. Faces of stone, Albert. And it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's incredibly like jarring. The visual of the hands on the face, I don't know what it is about it, but it taps into something like subconscious for me at least. Like when the hands are on the face, it's like it brings to mind like horrible Silent Hill Hellraiser type imagery because it's using sexuality with pain, with trauma, with the sort of covering of the physicality. There's an element of the unseen that because I know what his face looked like before, and then you cover it up, there's something like intuitive to me, and I think a lot of people maybe, about the idea that it's what you don't see that's horrifying.
It is one of the...
It's knowing that underneath her hands is coldness.
Yes.
And we're just seeing the hands there, but you know it's there, and she can't fully hide that either. That is, I think, very powerful. And amidst all these, again, negative things I will say about part 17, With Part 18, the execution's phenomenal. And with Part 18, I don't have a lot of gripes. Because Part 17 is the one that has the nonsense with Freddy and all the stuff going on there. Part 18, you can interpret the Jowday stuff with it. I don't, want it to be that. But in terms of, like, the feeling, I remember when I first watched Part 18, just this feeling of dread and uncertainty that was captivating for me. I loved Part 18 in the moment, but I loved it in the sense of dread. Because it was that feeling of, like, oh my god, I'm watching the end of Twin Peaks, and I have no clue what's happening. And it's that feeling of watching this uncertainty and the coldness and things being somewhat familiar, but not at the same time. I think there's a lot of wonderful things that are being done here in Part 18. I just have trouble when I can't connect it to the rest of the return. Like, I look at Part 8 and Part 18 as such outliers that I like in isolation, but when it comes to connecting them to the rest of it, I'm kind of just like, I don't know what to do about that. I just like them on their own as mood pieces. They're very good. And I think to Part 18's benefit, it does do things with previous material that are striking. Because we know Diane's experience with Mr. C, and because we know the Janie E. Dougie love scene, it does do a lot more for the scene between Dale Cooper and Diane in the motel.
It does. I'd argue that this is one of the most powerful, if not the powerful scenes inside The Return.
Yes. So I completely in agreement with you there. I've got nothing there. It's also, for me personally, hard for me not to think of another lovemaking scene with the woman on top, although not in a bed situation, and that would be Sam and Tracy before they got eviscerated. And considering the fact that they had that lovemaking scene and then the evisceration happened, we already, from the very beginning of the series, have this connotation of these sex rituals being the resulting in devastation. And depending on how you interpret Part 18's ending, and if you interpret the experiment to be Jowday,
yes,
it seems like the experiment Jowday struck again. In a different way.
In a different way.
Something was totally annihilated. It just might be more in Hawk's sense of totally annihilating your soul.
Yes.
Something happened.
Yes, and something does happen the following morning, seeing as a letter is left behind with two strange names.
Richard and Linda, time and time again.
In which Cooper, or potentially Richard.
Well, Cooper doesn't recognize, like, he's like, Richard, Linda. Maybe he remembers the names being important, but he does seem to be confused by the context. He doesn't seem to self-identify as Richard. And based on the way he talks to Carrie Page later, he seems to think of himself as Dale Cooper still.
Yes, it seems he still keeps himself as Dale Cooper. It seems he recognizes himself as Dale Cooper. There's still a little bit of a strange dissonance.
He also calls for Diane at first, so
he does.
He's remembering that.
He is someone who has more knowledge in the world than he likely should, likely because of where he's come from as well as what he's done. Because very notably, when he exits the hotel, one of the points of dissonance, which I would probably catch on to, is the fact that this is not a single floor hotel, it's 2 floors. The vehicle is black, but it's a whole different make and model.
Yes, he seems to react more to the vehicle. Weirdly enough, in the Twin Peaks wiki, it only mentioned the vehicle. It didn't mention the motels being different. Yeah. Which I think is the more jarring thing.
They just built a second floor overnight. It's the same place.
But yeah, so it's a different motel. It's a different car. He seems to be reacting to this with this sort of understanding that things are weird. I think what's being played with here is I think David Lynch is playing with the idea that we might be wondering right now as an audience if Dale Cooper is the dreamer. Because he wakes up from sleep and everything's changed. Which plants the idea, oh, it's the dreamer waking up. But then the rest of Part 18 does not confirm that. Yeah. It does not even remotely confirm it. You could still take it as your headcanon. I don't think it disproves it. But the way he's acting and what ends up happening at the end, if they would have gone with Carrie Page to the Tremont house and the Palmer house formerly, and nothing happened at the end, then it could be, oh, yeah, it's not Dale Cooper, it's not Laura Palmer. But the fact that the Laura scream happens and everything, reacts to electricity, something's going on beyond the real guy woke up. Right? Like, we gotta say that.
I mean, the most that I could say is that as Cooper, like, the furthest I can go with the Cooper being the dreamer end is more so Richard being the dreamer. Yeah. But Cooper is the one who wakes up and kind of like mechas Richard. In a sense that if we are to believe that, or at the very least, I might believe that there's other dreamers that can be multiple dreamers that can go on simultaneously. The fact that the girl goes to sleep at the lullaby in the past, and then Richard wakes up, that this might be that same sort of like level of world. If we go in like tiers of worlds.
Yeah.
I'm not going for tiers of worlds, though.
We're going for our world tier list right now,
World tier
folks.
list.
Richard goes to eat at Judy's, or Dale Cooper eats at Judy's, whatever you want to call him. I'm going to call him Cooper. You can call him Richard if you want.
I'm going to call him Cooper.
Yeah,
because it's Cooper.
Cooper goes to eat at Judy's, following kind of the logic of, okay, Judy's, that's suspicious. And
follow intuition.
You follow intuition. Okay, I'm going to assume it's intuition, although it could be prior knowledge. For all we know, he had a conversation with Philip Jeffries in the past, and he told him, when you go to Judy, you're going to find Carrie Page. Like, I don't know.
Maybe. From what we got to see, it doesn't seem like that's the case, but I do enjoy that could be a possibility. I like the idea is like, be sure to go to Judy's. It's an excellent restaurant. Yeah. You got to try their eggs.
Here's my link to my Yelp review.
Just like, and it puffs out in smoke, and there's like this little despondent, or it goes one letter at a time.
So, like, this is where I think on the most basic level, and probably the level that's easiest to endure, it's the idea that it's called Judy's out of, again, intuition logic, coincidence logic. It's a motivator for that. But, like, given everything you've said about Jowday and Judy, do you read into the name of the diner anything more than that?
I read into it that it is a diner set, and the position of the Laura Palmer figure is mirrored with Teresa Banks, and that's our sense of Irene's. You go off to this bar to find out that she's a hostess around there. She's not coming to work for multiple days.
Okay, good idea.
So that's where I'm kind of paralleling at the moment.
So there's that encounter with the group of men who are harassing the waitress. Everything about the way he handles it is cold, calculating, mechanical. And don't get me wrong, we know that Dale Cooper is an efficient lawman. We've seen him be very efficient and dispatch, criminals and apprehend people. We've also seen Dougie kick into action and tear his hand off and all that stuff.
Yes.
But there's something about the way that Richard carries it, the coldness of it, the kind of matter-of-factness in which he replies to the men at first. And most ominously, I would say, of all, is when he goes and asks for the address for Carrie, he's still holding the gun. He has yet to tell the waitress he's with the FBI. He's just a man holding a gun near a waitress.
He does towards the end, but still, regardless. After the fact, as he's, like, handing his gun, like, pointing around and then sticks guns into the fryer.
Yes, and I have things to say about that. I just want to make the note that, I don't know about you, but this is where things start feeling really wrong, because this doesn't feel like Dale Cooper.
Not to mention, the posing of it feels very unnatural, because it stays stiff, like you're playing GoldenEye 007 with your little gun.
What is your interpretation of that, then, that his voice, mannerisms, everything doesn't feel like Dale Cooper? Even though he says he's Dale Cooper, he has the memories and ideas of Dale Cooper, presumably. Why is he acting more like Mr. C?
He is from what I'm interpreting, using an example of not only the very end sequence where he's wondering what year it is at that time, but also from all the experience we've seen with Dougie Jones. There could be an adjustment period. There could be something in which, like, things aren't fully connecting. He knows of his goal. He knows what he has to do. And acting as this agent of Guardian Angel, he's just doing everything that he can do to get to that point. At this point, he's still doing things as a source of good, but he's not giving any mind credence or nuance to anything around him other than good actions. He sees, like, bad is going on into the area, so he quickly dispels of that, does that, says, I need the information, without nuance or mind.
So you think when he freshly woke up in the hospital, he was still not quite adjusted?
No, I think that this is just the point that he gets transported to this world through the hotel room is very similar when he's transported to the socket. Less extreme, mind you. Okay. He's more comfortable in bed. But to say that in this new world that he is in, with the new car and the new hotel and the name Richard around him, to say that there might be an adjustment period like when he went through the socket with Dougie Jones, I can believe in that.
When Dale Cooper is deep frying these guns, he has 3 of them he deep fries. When he got the guns, he only had 2. Yes. So I want to clarify the timeline here just to make sure logic's on everything here. Man draws gun. Cooper slams that gun down on the table, kicks the man in the groin, draws his own gun. There's currently a gun on the table and a gun in his hand, right? Mm-hmm. Then, at gunpoint, he gets the third man to give him his gun, which at first he says he doesn't have one, then he puts it on the floor. So Cooper gets up after the 3 men are on the floor, one's sitting, one's been shot in the foot, and one's been kicked in the groin, all 3 are on the floor. Mm-hmm. He grabs the gun that was on the floor. He has the gun in his hand, his own, and the 2 guns. He never got the gun from the man the third man there, right? He just only has 2. Then he goes behind the scenes to the deep fryer. He has 3 guns in addition to his own.
Yes.
Is that a glitch?
Is that a glitch?
I'm going to call this a mistake. I'm going to call this a mistake that doesn't matter, but it shows a sloppiness that I'm a bit surprised about because it's a continuity error. I think what happened is in the script, there were 3 bad guys, therefore 3 guns. but he never got that third gun. One gun he got by slamming on the table, and one he got by asking at gunpoint.
Yeah.
That second one he never got another one. So I'm just like, I look at that and it's like, that's some sloppiness I wouldn't expect out of the end of the return.
I mean, there's also the solution that, like, the guns, like, breed by mitosis.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake, and it's just to say the Twin Peaks The Return is not perfect. Not everything's on purpose. Some things can just be a mistake. This is probably the best example I can come up with of The Return of something that is just a mistake.
Fair. Or a glitch.
No, it's not. It's outright not a glitch. It's not a glitch. We do not see any glitches in the world that Richard's in. I don't see that, or whatever's going on with Dale Cooper there.
Mm-hmm.
He also passes along the way to Carrie Page's house the utility pole with the number 6 on it, which I believe is supposed to be the one that has been seen previously in Fire Walk with Me, and maybe also the one that was by the kid who got run over by the truck.
Recurring
but I'm
numbers.
a little bit confused if it's the same one or not. Yeah. Carrie Page, is Carrie Page Laura Palmer?
The last bit of Laura Palmer, I believe, just because the name's a bit on the nose.
When Carrie Page opens the door, she asks, did you find him?
Not to mention also the screaming of looking up at the top of the room at the very end of the show, which I think is very notable for someone to scream as they look at the top.
So do you think it's like a Tulpa situation? Because I remember reading that before, that someone said that Carrie Page is like the Tulpa Diane who basically, or Tulpa Dougie, like doesn't realize who they are until later, and then they realize who they are.
I think she
but with the twist that it actually is them and not a mistake.
Yeah,
Tulpa.
I think it's literally kind of the Tulpa situation, but more so it's the last remnants of Laura Palmer.
So do you think this is Laura Palmer who didn't die, then went into like hiding and forgot her old life with amnesia, or was made to forget supernaturally, or is this a different timeline? Is this a third timeline?
I think it goes straight into that metaphor of the last bit that remains, the one that's been tucked away and hidden off to way off to the furthest ends of the world, almost to try to keep a little bit of hope still out there.
Okay.
But then Dale Cooper brings that hope in, then here you go.
I think Laura Palmer's story was already done in Fire Walk with Me, so I'm just kind of looking at this like...
It's using Laura Palmer as that golden orb. It's using Laura Palmer as that ideal thing and something that could heal.
It's turning Laura into a MacGuffin.
It's using Laura Palmer as a bandage against Joe Day.
I don't like that. So Carrie Page opens the door and she says, did you find him? That is her first question. Who do you believe is the him?
It's whoever Carrie Page is having issues with, because we see at least one of the goons, or the main goon, or the main guy. So maybe it was like someone that would be able to help her out with the fact that she murdered a man and the corpse is right there. I think that there's a storyline going on with Carrie Page that the only context we get for is that she got herself into a lot of trouble with the guy.
Part of me is led to the meta reading that Carrie Page is in some way a metaphor also for the viewers, that the did you find him is the urgent asking of did you find the killer to Laura Palmer? Who is the killer? And that answer, that's seeking for an answer. And then at first cautiously is head to go back to Twin Peaks. Again, going back to Twin Peaks to be a metaphor for the third season, The Return. And that when she goes back to Twin Peaks, what she ends up finding is something incomprehensible and terrifying.
Yes.
So if I read Carrie Page as not only an element of Laura Palmer, but also an abstraction of the viewer who is wanting answers, wanting closure, and then ends up getting confused more by the end and screaming, that works. I don't find it especially good. But it's a reading that kind of does fit. If I want to take any meaning to did you find him, it could be the killer or something. But speaking of killers, we see inside of her house a dead man, shot in the head man. And I think he kind of looks like a Bob Mr. C type, but he's not the same thing at all.
He's not.
What, did Carrie kill him?
Yeah.
Was she justified? What happened?
Man's dead.
Okay.
Man's dead and is sitting inside a chair, probably at a point blank, and it was probably in one of those desperate situations if we are to read Carrie Page in a similar light to Laura Palmer, if we're going to parallel.
Otherwise, she's a serial killer.
Elsewise, we haven't seen more than one kill.
Okay, fine.
So they're not serial killers, just one killer.
One killer.
Can't break out the cereal box yet.
Notably, when Cooper says her father's name is Leland, she's like, okay, so what? But then when he's like, yeah, your mother's name is Sarah, and she's like, Sarah? So, like, for some reason, the name Sarah being her mother's name affects her a lot more than Leland being her father.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you imploringly.
You're looking at me imploringly. It could be something that is when he gets 2 for 2, and she's getting more details, that's when, like, it shakes the foundation. It could be specifically because it was Sarah Palmer.
It seems very specific to me.
It could be. It could be. I'm not discounting it, but it could be for the sake of the specificness of Sarah Palmer that... I don't know if Laura Palmer, other than having, like, the usual teenage issues with her mother, would have too much to gripe against.
I don't think the
against your
secret
mother.
history of Twin Peaks makes that. No, I wouldn't say it's supported
Yeah. So
by the other material.
in this case, it's more of a figure that could be more positively associated with the figure if we think that the specific name
Because the
is
reaction
important.
difference seems really on point, that Leland's a non-reaction and then Sarah Palmer like actually affects her very deeply. So I don't know what to do with that difference very much.
I take it as the second swing of the axe that as long as you keep hitting at certain notes, eventually things are going to tip over the tree.
Okay, interesting. Also, notably in her house is the white figurine of a horse.
What? A white horse? What could that mean?
Against a black plate. What does it mean, actually?
Black and white, horse of death. Something being like black and absolute could be very reflective, if you will. Something that you would be served up with. Black being something with a plate, Garmonbosia.
I do like the image of the white horse. I think it's a nice, like, specific but not overbearing way to tie in something that could mean more but doesn't have to.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the ambiguity of the white horse figurine.
I think it's the promise of death with the context of Garmonbosia that's about to come.
The long drive ensues. Not much conversation happens. Carrie does reminisce about Odessa, talking at first about how she tried to keep her house clean, which you can maybe take as a metaphor for keeping her life clean.
Yeah.
And she said, in those days, I was too young to know any better. And again, it's unclear. Does she mean in those days of being Laura Palmer, or does she mean in those days of being a new character, Carrie Page? It is not completely clear.
No, I'm leaning to the Carrie Page end just because the fuller realizations come up later. So I think we're getting some good exposition for
I think
the
we're
Carrie
getting
Page life.
not much exposition at all. I think saying I tried to keep my house clean and I didn't know better, it's not really telling us anything.
It's a hypothetical realm in which if we are to associate Carrie Page as a Laura Palmer that managed to grow up and grow older, that even then she was still faced with the trials and tribulations later in her life, though she was able to live on for another 25 years.
The last thing I have on here is that when they do reach the Palmer household, we talked about the Tremond Chalfont element. The other thing to, of course, talk about is that Alice Tremond, not only Alice, as in maybe Alice in Wonderland, but also Lost Highway Alice Wakefield, which, not a joke, wake, the dream, the idea of waking up, is pretty on the nose if you draw the Wakefield comparison. But Alice is a name that, again, has connotations of Alice in Wonderland, at least to me, and is played by an interesting performance. And is played by an interesting choice of actor. So Alice Tremond is played by Mary Reber, the real owner in real life of the Palmer home. So not only that, but the person she's talking to outside of view, I think, is also her husband. Like, it is literally the people who live in that house in real life.
Yes.
Which I think adds fuel to the fire if you wanted to believe that Dale Cooper woke up in the real world or something. The problem is that it inserts a fictional story about Chalfont that I'm assuming is not real.
Yeah.
But then also, her name's not really Alice Tremond in real life. But also, as I said before, the Double R Diner, they go to Twin Peaks. So why cast the real person who owns the home, inviting this meta angle, if it's not actually the real world?
I think there's a few benefits. For one, if David Lynch approaches and finds this home and there's a person that lives there, they happen to be a fan of Twin Peaks, like having the opportunity to not only have this fun Easter egg, but also be like, hey, do you want to be involved with this? We have a scene that could be involved with this, and they're a big fan. Like, it could be just a fun opportunity for the person, especially if you were to mark down the price, or at the very least make a relative price that seems fair with the associated role to use your home for scenes.
And I want to clarify, I do a lot of rhetorical questions now and then. This is one where I do like her being the person. I think it adds an interesting element, even if I don't know what it fully means. But I do wonder, like, how important was this casting? Like, let's say, for example, if Mary Reber, the homeowner, didn't want to be in the show, didn't feel comfortable acting, was it important for this to be the owner of the home in real life? Was this something David Lynch really meant as, like, a reason to do this?
I'm not fully convinced. I think that there could be an argument where it's just like, kind of like play with that weird meta angle. Which world are we in? Are we beyond the dream? I think that could be a potential question you could bring up. But on the other end, judging by the existence of Frank Truman, if they couldn't get the casting to be that case, or it wasn't a conversation that casting was agreed upon, would he get someone else to fill the role? I think so.
Okay. Interesting. Do you have anything else that you wish to bring up about Part 17 and 18 in Twin Peaks: The Return?
I like him.
You know what I like? The whooshing counter! I really like the whoosh encounter
You
this
didn't
time.
even like make a build up. You just
Just
flapped a whole
dropped
whoosh
it
in my
the
face.
same way that part 17 dropped whooshes left and right.
Oh,
you watched
God.
it with subtitles. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
But only one of us counted them.
Only one of us was at a capacity to count them.
To set the stage, previously, parts 1 through 16, we had 60 whooshes total.
Okay.
Part 17 gave us 42.
How do you feel, Kalil? That nearly the entire quantity of...
It's literally the beginning and ending that give you all the whooshes.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, the experiment
This one
section.
especially so because,
Yes.
like, even then, like, I'm pretty sure what was, like, the first episode's
It was like,
whoosh
I would
amount?
say it was like 10 or 20. Like it
It
was
doubles!
Yes. So, the single best thing about part 17 is the number of whooshes. Cannot stand part 17 in the broad strokes of things. I've made that very clear, I think. Number of whooshes, so beautiful. And I say this jokingly. The thing I find really amusing about the use of the term whoosh is that it is not a very common word to use to describe things. There are a few instances in which if I was writing something, I might describe it as a whoosh. But very rarely. It's not usually a word that comes to my mind, let alone to use it as a catch-all term for nearly everything.
Yes.
Like car traffic, that's a whoosh. The fan, okay, those can whoosh, I agree with that. Ethereal whooshing, ominous whooshing, any sound effect made by an entity outside of our realm, it's a whoosh. It's all whoosh. Which is where it, like, I haven't read it yet, but I'm still interested in the idea that John Thorne, one of the key figures in Twin Peaks, that he wrote the book Ominous Whoosh about the return. It's such a great title because, yeah, that's what the subtitles keep doing is ominous whoosh. It's so good. Anyway, 42 whooshes in part 17. Part 18, a little more conservative, but still a good showing of 9 whooshes. Bringing us to a total, if my count is correct. If I did not miss any or double count. 111 whooshes. Would it have been better if it was 110 or 112? Yes. Will I accept 111? I will.
How powerful is the number 111 to you?
It's pretty good. I mean, like, I think if it was a perfect 100, that'd be pretty powerful. It's like the number of completion times 10. But, like...
The reoccurring ones is not good
Reoccurring
enough.
ones is pretty good.
I mean, if it was like 112, would you be more happy
well,
since
each
that's
one
even?
represents a Kyle MacLachlan. We got the Dale, we got the Mr. C, we got the Dougie, all ones.
All of them are a whoosh.
Number 1. So, yeah, 111. Did it meet or exceed your expectations?
It was all your expectations.
So, yes, it did, then, is what you're saying. So, I always say expect the unexpected. And by always say, I mean I've never said that once in this podcast. But I'm saying it now. Because you know at this point, there's a lot of times a wonderful and strange question of the week. Professor, what if I told you I had 10?
You still have 10, too, after all our discussion.
Well, okay, like, some of them you kind of already answered, but I want a declarative answer at the end.
Fair.
So what I want to do is I want to give you a volley of 10 questions. I just want to shoot them at you one after another. And I want your succinct answer to them. You could do it in as few words as you want. Number 1, who is the dreamer?
Sarah Palmer or Laura Palmer, you're leaning on Sarah.
Number 2, what is the blue rose?
Something weird in nature.
Number 3, what are owls?
Spiritual-like beings, but also sometimes literal owls.
Number 4, is it the story of the little girl who lived down the lane?
Yes, but not the one you expect. That being Sarah Palmer from Down the Lane.
Is it future or is it past?
Both? Because if we do believe that the dream can go on, maybe it's never ended, or maybe it's still in that instance. It is something in the past as time is going on.
What year is this?
Right now, 2022. Inside the narrative, time doesn't matter in the sense of the year other than it passes.
Is it about the bunnies?
It's chocolate sweet, but the tinfoil's left behind.
I'm going to leave the long pause you gave. Those are the most thought you've given to any of these so far. Number 8, what happened to Josie?
She's at the beginning of the little section where she's like doing her makeup, and I imagine there's no doorknob she has to be trapped in this timeline.
How's Annie?
God.
Number 10, who killed Laura Palmer?
Me. No, it's Leland.
I had no clue how off the wall, up its own rear, your answer was going to be. I'm really glad you just went for that. That is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Next time on Twin Peaks Wonderful and Strange Logcast Twin Peaks, we're going to be talking about the special features of the return. Is this going to be one part? Is this going to be 2 parts?
27 parts.
27 parts. It's going to be 1 part, but longer than this episode you're listening to right now? We don't know.
Well,
Anything can happen.
anything.
So if you haven't checked out the returns from the Z to A collection and you have that available to you, that's what we're going to be talking about.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's rock.
What's a good ending for that? I know Let's Rock is good, but like this is what should we do?
It could be Let's Rock, then it goes do 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 do.
Do 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 do.
That's the ending. Do do do.
That's the ending. Yeah.
Love it.